The stagecoach door swung open, and Evelyn Carter stepped into the dust with a black eye barely hidden beneath her bonnet and a carpetbag that held everything she owned. The cowboy waiting for her, tall, scarred, dangerous looking, wasn't what she'd expected. When he reached for her hand, she flinched hard. He froze, then spoke low. "Darlin, I don't bite. Not unless you ask." She didn't know if that was a promise or a threat, but she was about to find out. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The Texas Panhandle in the summer of 1884 was a place where the sun didn't just shine, it punished. It beat down on the red earth like a hammer on an anvil, turning the town of Dust River into something that shimmered and wavered in the heat, more mirage than reality. The buildings along Main Street leaned slightly, as if exhausted by their own existence, their wooden facades bleached gray by years of relentless exposure. Tumbleweeds gathered in the corners where the wind forgot them, and the only sounds were the occasional creak of a windmill and the lazy buzz of flies that seemed to own the place. It was into this silence that the afternoon stagecoach arrived, its wheels grinding through the dirt, leaving twin trails of dust that hung in the air long after it had stopped. The driver, a weathered man named Tucker, with a face like old leather, pulled the reins and set the brake with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. He didn't bother announcing the stop. In Dust River, there was rarely anyone to announce it to. But today was different. Today, Colt Maddox was waiting. He stood in the shade of the general store's overhang, one shoulder propped against a support beam, his hat pulled low enough to shadow most of his face. To anyone watching, he might have looked relaxed, even lazy. But the tension in his jaw and the way his fingers drummed against his thigh told a different story. He'd been standing there for the better part of an hour, watching that eastern road like it might disappear if he looked away. 3 months. That's how long it had been since he'd sent that letter. He still wasn't sure what had possessed him to do it. Loneliness, maybe. The kind that settled into your bones after too many winters alone, after too many conversations with horses and too many suppers eaten in silence. His neighbor, Dutch Harrison, had shown him the advertisement in the back of a newspaper from Philadelphia. Refined ladies seeking Western prospects, and had laughed about it like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. "Can you imagine," Dutch had wheezed, slapping the paper, "some fancy Eastern girl coming out here to marry a roughneck like you?" Colt had taken the paper home. Read it by lamplight. Read it again. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he'd written a letter. He'd tried to be honest without being pathetic, describing his ranch, his circumstances, what he could offer. He didn't promise wealth or excitement, just land, a roof, and a man who'd treat her decent. He hadn't expected a response. But Evelyn Carter had written back. Her letters had been careful, proper, with handwriting so neat it looked printed. She told him she was 26, unmarried, educated in a girls' school in Pennsylvania. She'd mentioned that she had few remaining ties to the East and was seeking a fresh beginning in a place where the past holds no claim. That last part had stuck with him, where the past holds no claim. It sounded like something a person wrote when they were running from something. He understood that. Hell, he respected it. But now, watching Tucker climb down from the driver's seat and walk around to open the passenger door, Colt felt something close to panic tighten in his chest. This was real. This wasn't just letters and imagination anymore. In about 30 seconds, a woman was going to step out of that coach expecting to marry him, and he had no damn idea what to say to her. The door opened. For a moment, nothing happened. Tucker stepped back, waiting, and Colt found himself holding his breath. Then a hand appeared, pale, slender, gripping the doorframe like it was the only solid thing in the world. A boot followed, scuffed black leather that had seen better days. And then she was there, stepping down into the dust and the heat and the endless Texas sky. Evelyn Carter. Colt's first thought was that she was smaller than he'd expected. Not fragile exactly, but slight in a way that made him think of birds, the kind that migrated thousands of miles on nothing but determination. Her dress was dark gray, high-necked and long-sleeved despite the heat, and practical in a way that spoke of necessity rather than choice. Her hair, dark brown and pulled back in a simple bun, had come partly loose during the journey, and a few strands clung to her temples. But it was her face that stopped him cold. Even from 15 feet away, even with her bonnet shading most of her features, he could see the bruise. It spread from her left cheekbone up toward her eye, a sickly palette of purple and yellow-green that makeup or powder had tried and failed to hide. The eye itself was bloodshot, the white marbled with red. She stood there in the street, one hand clutching a battered carpet bag, the other still gripping the coach door, and looked around with the expression of someone who just jumped off a cliff and was waiting to see if she could fly. Her gaze found him. For 3 heartbeats, they stared at each other across that dusty street, two strangers about to tie their lives together based on nothing but words on paper and mutual desperation. Then Colt pushed off from the wall and started toward her. He was careful to move slowly, to keep his hands visible. Even so, he saw her tense, saw her knuckles go white on the handle of that bag. When he got within 10 feet, she took a small step backward. He stopped. "Miss Carter?" His voice came out rougher than he'd intended, gravelly from disuse. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I'm Colt Maddox." She nodded once, quick and nervous, like a sparrow deciding whether to bolt. Up close, the damage to her face was even worse. The bruise was at least a week old, maybe more, and it hadn't been the only blow. He could see the faint yellow shadow of an older injury along her jaw, and her bottom lip had a barely healed split on one side. Something dark and ugly twisted in Colt's gut. He pulled his hat off, ran a hand through his hair, and tried to figure out what the hell you were supposed to say to a woman who'd traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger. "It's good to finally meet you. Your letters, they were real nice." "Thank you." Her voice was so quiet he almost didn't hear it. Eastern accent, refined, but shaking. "Yours were as well." Behind her, Tucker was unloading a small trunk from the back of the coach, apparently her only other possession. He set it in the dirt with a thump and tipped his hat to Evelyn. "Safe travels, miss. Welcome to Texas." She managed a small smile for him, but it died the moment she looked back at Colt. He'd seen that look before. On horses that had been beaten. On dogs that had learned that kindness was just cruelty waiting to happen. It was the look of something that expected to be hurt, and was just trying to figure out how bad it would be this time. "I have a wagon just over there," he said, gesturing toward the hitching post where his horse and buckboard waited. "Ranch is about 5 miles out. We can get you settled, get you some water. I imagine you're worn out from the trip." "I'm fine." The words came fast, automatic, like a phrase she'd learned to say whether it was true or not. "Right." Colt bent down and picked up her trunk, light enough that he could tell it didn't hold much, and lifted it with one hand. With the other, he reached for her carpet bag. "Let me help you with—" She jerked back so fast she almost fell, pulling the bag against her chest like he'd tried to take something vital. Her eyes went wide, showing white all around, and for a second Colt thought she might actually run. He immediately raised both hands, palms out, and took a step back. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to. I was just going to carry it to the wagon. But you hold on to it. That's fine. That's all right." She was breathing hard, shallow gasps that made her shoulders rise and fall. Her gaze darted past him to the street, to the buildings, to the empty horizon, like she was looking for an escape route. "Miss Carter." He kept his voice low, calm, the same tone he'd use with a spooked mare. "I know this is strange. I know you don't know me from Adam. But I give you my word. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to take anything that's yours. And if you want to get back on that coach when it leaves in an hour, I'll pay your fare back east myself. No questions asked." She stared at him, and he could see her mind working, trying to decide if he was telling the truth or just saying what she wanted to hear. Finally, she swallowed and loosened her death grip on the bag, just slightly. "I appreciate your consideration, Mr. Maddox." Each word was carefully chosen, properly enunciated. "I apologize for my reaction. The journey has been difficult." "No need to apologize." He gestured again toward the wagon, but made no move to touch her or crowd her. "Whenever you're ready." She took a breath, squared her shoulders in a way that looked like it cost her, and started walking toward the buckboard. Her steps were careful, measured, like she was navigating a minefield. Colt followed a few paces behind, carrying her trunk, and tried not to notice the way she kept glancing back at him, like she needed to know where he was at all times. The wagon was nothing special. sturdy, functional, with a plank seat and a bed big enough for supplies. His horse, a roan gelding named Rust, dozed in the harness, tail flicking at flies. When they approached, the horse lifted his head and nickered softly. Evelyn stopped, and for the first time since stepping off the stage, something other than fear crossed her face. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "He's old and stubborn," Colt said, setting the trunk in the wagon bed. "But he's good company." He moved to Rust's head and stroked the horse's nose. "This is Rust. He won't bite unless you're made of sugar cubes." Was that almost a smile? It flickered at the corner of her mouth and then vanished, but he'd seen it. "May I?" She took a small step closer, one hand half raised. "Go ahead." She approached slowly, extending her hand toward Rust's muzzle. The horse, bless him, stood perfectly still and let her touch him, even leaning slightly into her palm when she stroked his cheek. Some of the tension drained out of her shoulders. "I had a horse once," she said quietly, still petting Rust. "When I was a girl, a little gray mare named Patience." "What happened to her?" The tension snapped back immediately, and she pulled her hand away. "My father sold her when I was 13. The way she said it, flat, empty, told Colt there was a lot more to that story. None of it good. "Well," he said after a moment, "we've got 3 horses at the ranch. You're welcome to ride any of them, whenever you want." She looked at him sharply, like she was trying to figure out if this was some kind of trick. Even if we're not what? Married." The word hung between them, heavy and complicated. Colt met her eyes. Brown, he noticed, the color of oak bark, and currently filled with a mixture of hope and absolute terror. "Miss Carter, far as I'm concerned, you're not obligated to anything. Not to me, not to any agreement we made in letters. You want to stay at the ranch, keep your own room, take your time figuring things out. That's fine. You want to leave tomorrow, next week, next month, also fine. The horses are there. The land is there. You're welcome to both, no strings attached." "That's not—" She shook her head slightly, confusion creasing her brow. "That's not how this works. You sent money for my passage. You have expectations." "I've got exactly one expectation," Colt said, "that you'll be honest with me if you're unhappy or uncomfortable. Everything else, we can figure out as we go." She studied him for a long moment, and he had the distinct feeling he was being measured against some invisible standard, some template of men who'd come before him. He wondered what they'd done to put that bruise on her face, that tremor in her hands. He wondered if he'd ever measure up to whatever it was she needed. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "Yeah, well," he managed a half smile. "You're exactly what I expected." Her eyebrows rose. "What do you mean?" "Someone brave enough to get on a train alone and travel halfway across the country to marry a stranger. Someone strong enough to keep going even when everything probably told you to stop." He nodded toward her face, careful not to stare directly at the bruise. "Someone who's been through hell but is still standing." Her breath caught, and for a second he thought she might cry. But she didn't. She just clutched her carpetbag tighter and looked away, blinking hard. "We should go," she said, voice strained, "before it gets any hotter." "Yes, ma'am." He helped her up onto the wagon seat. She flinched when his hand touched her elbow, but she didn't pull away, and then climbed up beside her. Not too close, leaving a good foot of space between them. He picked up the reins, released the brake, and clicked his tongue at Rust. The wagon lurched into motion, wheels creaking, and they rolled out of Dust River heading west into an ocean of grass and sky. For the first mile, neither of them spoke. Colt kept his attention on the road, 2 ruts in the earth that passed for a road out here, and tried to think of something to say that wouldn't sound stupid. Every possibility that came to mind seemed wrong. "Nice weather we're having" was idiotic when you could fry an egg on a rock. "Tell me about yourself" felt like an interrogation. So, about that bruise was absolutely out of the question. Beside him, Evelyn sat rigid, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead like she was trying to memorize the horizon. The carpetbag sat at her feet, and even though her hands were empty, he could tell she was still mentally clutching it. It's pretty flat out here," Colt finally offered, then immediately wanted to kick himself. Pretty flat? That's what he was going with. "Yes." A pause. "Very flat." Another half mile of silence. You must be thirsty, he tried again. There's a canteen behind the seat. Water's not cold, but it's wet. Thank you. She didn't reach for it. This was going great, just great. Look, he said, pulling Russ to a stop. I know I'm not good at this. Talking to people, I mean. Especially women. Especially women who... He gestured vaguely at the space between them. But here's the thing. We've got 5 miles ahead of us, and then a whole life after that, assuming you decide to stay. And if we're going to make this work, or even just make it bearable, we're going to have to figure out how to talk to each other. She turned to look at him fully for the first time since they'd left town. Her expression was guarded, but there was something else there, too. Curiosity, maybe, or hope. What do you want to know? She asked. Everything, he thought. Who hurt you? Who do I need to find? How do I make you stop looking at me like I'm about to hit you? But he couldn't say any of that. So instead he said, why don't you start with something easy? Favorite color? She blinked. My favorite color? Yeah, mine's blue. Not fancy blue, just regular blue, sky blue. A pause. Then, green, the color of spring grass. Good choice. Favorite food? Strawberries. This time she answered faster, and there was the ghost of warmth in her voice. Fresh strawberries with cream. Don't get many of those out here, but we've got blackberries that grow wild by the creek in August. They're pretty good. He clicked to Rust, and the wagon started moving again. Favorite season? Autumn, when the air turns cool and the leaves change. We don't get much in the way of leaves changing here, but autumn's nice, not as hot. The grass turns gold. He glanced at her. Your turn. Ask me something. She was quiet for a moment, considering. How long have you had the ranch? About 6 years. Bought it off a man who was heading back east after his wife died. He'd already done most of the hard work, built the house, dug the well, cleared some land. I've just been trying to keep it going and make it a little better each year. Is it difficult? Ranching, I mean. Some days more than others. It's a lot of work for one person, but I manage. Got about 40 head of cattle, some chickens, a couple of pigs. It's not a big operation, but it's mine. He paused. Ours, if you stay. She looked down at her hands. I don't know anything about ranching. Didn't figure you did. But you can learn if you want to. Or not. Like I said, no obligations. Everyone has obligations, Mr. Maddox? Maybe. But beating yourself up trying to meet expectations that don't make sense. That's not an obligation, that's just cruelty. He said it casually, but he saw her stiffen. He'd hit close to something. You seem to have she searched for the word, progressive ideas about marriage. I've got practical ideas about life. You can't force someone to care about you. Can't force someone to stay. All you can do is be decent and hope that's enough. He shrugged. Besides, I didn't ask for a wife because I wanted someone to boss around. I asked because I was tired of eating supper alone. That surprised a small laugh out of her. Quick, startled, like she hadn't expected it herself. She immediately covered her mouth with her hand, but he'd heard it. That's a better sound, he said quietly. She lowered her hand but didn't respond, just looked out at the landscape rolling past. They were in proper prairie now, nothing but grass and sky for miles in every direction. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals. In the distance, a small herd of pronghorn grazed, their white rumps flashing as they moved. It's so empty, Evelyn murmured. So much space. That bother you? No. She said it quickly, firmly. No, I think I like it. Back east, everything was so close together, so many people, so many eyes watching. Her hands tightened in her lap. Here, it feels like you could breathe and no one would hear you. Or scream, Colt said, then immediately regretted it when she went pale. I didn't mean... That came out wrong. I just meant, yeah, there's a lot of space, privacy, freedom, nobody looking over your shoulder. She nodded slowly, but didn't seem entirely convinced. They rode in silence for another stretch, but it felt different now, less tense, more like two people who were trying to figure each other out rather than two prisoners chained together. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said eventually. Sure. Your letters were very proper, very formal, but you don't talk that way. Why? Colt felt his ears heat up. I might have had help with those. Dutch, he's my neighbor. He used to be a school teacher before he came west. I told him what I wanted to say, and he helped me make it sound less stupid. You didn't sound stupid. I would have if I'd written it myself. My spelling's not great, and I never got much past 6th grade before I had to start working. He glanced at her. That bother you? That I'm not educated? No? She said it without hesitation. My father had 3 university degrees, and he was the cruelest man I've ever known. Intelligence and education don't make someone good. There it was again, that carefully blank tone that meant she was talking about something that hurt too much to show. Colt wanted to ask more, but he could feel her closing up, walls going back up brick by brick. We're almost there, he said instead, pointing ahead to where a line of cottonwoods marked the location of a creek. Just over that rise. She straightened, tension returning to her shoulders. This was it, the moment of truth. Once she saw the ranch, saw what would be her home if she stayed, she'd make up her mind one way or another. Colt found himself holding his breath as they crested the low hill and the ranch came into view. It wasn't much. He knew that. A small house, 2 rooms and a loft, built from pine logs chinked with mud and prairie clay. A barn that leaned slightly to the left but was structurally sound. A chicken coop, a pig pen, a corral where 2 horses stood dozing in the shade. The cottonwood tree he'd mentioned, old and gnarled, stood beside the house like a guardian. Beyond it all, the creek wound through a shallow valley, lined with willows and tall grass. To someone from Philadelphia, used to brick buildings and paved streets and modern conveniences, it probably looked like the edge of the world. Evelyn stared at it in silence. Colt waited, watching her face, trying to read her reaction. Was that disappointment? Horror? Resignation? There's a garden plot behind the house, he heard himself saying, filling the silence. Previous owner's wife planted roses, but they died after she passed. Didn't have the heart or the knowledge to keep them going. But the soil's good. You could plant whatever you wanted. She still didn't say anything. The house is small, he continued, but it's solid, doesn't leak, stays relatively cool in summer, warm in winter, and that creek never runs dry, even in drought years. Good water, sweet tasting. Finally, she spoke. Is that the tree? The cottonwood? Yeah, it's got to be 60, 70 years old. Probably was here long before anyone built anything. It's beautiful. Her voice was soft, almost wondering. I didn't expect trees. We've got a few, not like back east, I imagine, but enough. She turned to look at him, and there was something different in her expression now, something less guarded. It's not what I expected either. Better or worse? I don't know yet. Fair enough. He drove the wagon up to the house and set the brake. Before he could climb down, Evelyn was already moving, gathering her skirts and stepping down on her own. She stood in the yard, slowly turning in a circle, taking it all in. The house, the barn, the animals, the endless sky. Darlin, I don't bite, Colt found himself saying as he climbed down from the wagon. Not unless you ask. She froze, then turned to look at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You said that before, in town. Did I? Sorry, nervous habit, I guess, saying stupid things. It's not stupid. She hesitated. It's just unexpected. He hefted her trunk from the wagon bed and started toward the house. Come on, I'll show you inside, then you can decide if you want to stay or if you want me to drive you back to town for that next stagecoach. The inside of the house was cool and dim after the bright heat outside. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a wood stove in one corner, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a single armchair by the window. Everything was clean but spare. A bachelor's efficiency without any softness or decoration. This is the main room, Colt said unnecessarily. He pointed to a door on the left. That's my room, and this, he opened a door on the right, would be yours. The room was small but not cramped. A bed with a simple frame and a quilt, faded but clean, took up most of the space. A dresser with a chipped mirror, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, a window that looked out toward the creek, and on the inside of the door there was a lock. Evelyn stared at that lock for a long moment. I installed it last month, Colt said quietly, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed. after I got your letter saying you were coming. Figured you might want your privacy." He pulled a key from his pocket and held it out to her. "This is the only key. You can lock it from the inside or the outside. Your choice, always." She took the key slowly, like she couldn't quite believe it was real. Her fingers closed around it, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. "There's a bolt on the back door, too," he continued, "and I sleep heavy. You want to leave in the middle of the night, take a horse, take the wagon, whatever you need, I won't stop you. You're not a prisoner here, Miss Carter. You're a guest. And if you decide to stay longer than that, well, we'll figure it out." She looked up at him, and her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Why are you being so kind? This is just basic decency. You'd be surprised how uncommon that is." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. I'll let you settle in. Get some rest. I need to check on the animals anyway." He started to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and there's a well out back. Water's safe to drink. There's soap and towels in the kitchen if you want to wash up. Help yourself to anything you need. Mr. Maddox?" He turned back. "Thank you." She said it simply, quietly, but there was weight behind it. Years of weight. "You're welcome, Miss Carter." He closed the door behind him and stood in the main room for a moment, listening. He heard the soft sound of the lock turning, then nothing. Good. She felt safe enough to lock the door. That was something. Colt walked outside into the furnace heat of the afternoon and headed for the barn, his mind churning. That bruise on her face had been bad. The way she'd flinched from any sudden movement had been worse. And the look in her eyes when he'd mentioned the lock, the way she'd clutched that key like a lifeline. Someone had hurt her, badly, repeatedly, and she'd run all the way to Texas to get away from them. He thought about the careful way she'd phrased things in her letters. Few remaining ties to the East. No mention of family, of friends, of anyone who might miss her or come looking. She'd packed everything she owned into one small trunk and a carpet bag, gotten on a train, and put 1,000 miles between herself and whatever had put those bruises on her skin and that terror in her eyes. In the barn, he found his other 2 horses, a bay mare named Willow and a paint gelding named Chester, waiting expectantly for their evening feed. He gave them each some oats and fresh water, then checked on the chickens and pigs. The work was familiar, mindless, giving him time to think. What the hell was he doing? He'd thought this would be simple. He'd send for a wife, she'd arrive, they'd get married at the courthouse in town, and then they'd settle into some kind of life together. Companionship, partnership. Maybe eventually affection. Instead, he'd gotten a woman who looked at him like he might hit her at any moment, who clutched her belongings like they might be stolen, who locked herself in her room and probably wouldn't come out until tomorrow. This wasn't going to be simple at all. But as he worked, he kept coming back to the same thought. She'd traveled 1,000 miles on nothing but hope and desperation. The least he could do was give her a safe place to land, even if that meant keeping his distance, even if that meant never getting what he'd hoped for when he'd sent that first letter. She'd been through enough. She didn't need him adding to it. By the time he finished the evening chores, the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. He washed up at the well, scrubbing the day's dirt and sweat from his hands and face, then headed back to the house. The door to Evelyn's room was still closed. Quietly, trying not to make any noise that might disturb her, he kindled a fire in the stove and started making supper. Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread, the same thing he ate most nights, but he made extra, in case she was hungry. He was just pulling the cornbread from the oven when he heard the soft sound of her door opening. She stood in the doorway, still wearing the gray dress, but with her hair down now, hanging past her shoulders in dark waves. She looked younger like that, more vulnerable. The bruise on her face was stark in the lamplight. "I smelled food," she said hesitantly. "I hope I'm not intruding." "You're not intruding. This is your home. Or could be." He gestured to the table. "I made extra, if you're hungry." "I am. Thank you." She sat down carefully, like she was still testing whether this was allowed. He served her a plate of beans and a thick slice of cornbread, then got one for himself and sat down across from her. They ate in silence for a few minutes. He tried not to watch her, but he couldn't help noticing the way she ate. Small bites, slow, like she was forcing herself, like her stomach was in knots. "It's good," she said finally. "Simple, but good." I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage the basics. That's more than I can say. My father believed education for women should focus on literature and music, not domestic skills. She said it dryly, with just a hint of bitterness. You play music? Piano. Or I did. I haven't touched one in 5 years. Why not? She set down her fork and he watched the walls go up again. My father sold it, along with most of our other possessions, when his investments failed. That why you left? Financial trouble? That was part of it. She picked up her fork again, but didn't eat, just pushed beans around her plate. The main reason was that he'd arranged for me to marry his business partner, a man twice my age who'd already buried 2 wives. Colt's jaw tightened. I take it you weren't enthusiastic about the arrangement. I told him I wouldn't do it, that I'd rather live in poverty than marry that man. Her voice was flat, emotionless, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the fork. He said I was being ungrateful, hysterical, that I didn't understand what was best for me. And the bruise? She touched her face instinctively, then dropped her hand. That came later, after I kept refusing, after I tried to leave. The rage that bloomed in Colt's chest was sharp and sudden, but he kept it off his face. Getting angry wouldn't help her. It would just scare her more. But you got away, he said quietly. Eventually. A neighbor, an older woman who'd been kind to me, helped me, gave me money she'd been saving, helped me pack in the middle of the night while my father was passed out drunk, took me to the train station before dawn. She finally looked up at him, and her eyes were haunted. I left without saying goodbye to anyone, without taking anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. I've been traveling for 3 weeks, staying in cheap boarding houses, eating stale bread, trying to make the money last until I got here. And if I'd turned out to be just like your father, just like that business partner? She smiled, but there was no humor in it. Then I would have run again, and kept running until I found somewhere they couldn't follow, or until I ran out of places to go. But you took the risk. You got on that stagecoach even though you didn't know what you were walking into. The risk of staying was worse. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Well, Colt said eventually, pushing back from the table, for what it's worth, I'm glad that neighbor helped you. And I'm glad you got on that train. And I'm glad you're here, even if I'm probably the last person who knows how to help someone in your situation. You've already helped, Evelyn said softly, more than you know. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just started clearing the table. She rose to help him, but he waved her off. You've had a long day. Go rest. I'll take care of this. She hesitated, then nodded. Good night, Mr. Maddox. Colt, he said. You can call me Colt. Mr. Maddox makes me feel like my father. Good night, Colt. Good night, Evelyn. She disappeared back into her room, and a moment later he heard the quiet click of the lock. Colt stood at the sink, washing dishes in water that had gone cold, and stared out the window at the darkening prairie. Moths battered against the glass, drawn to the lamplight inside. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. This wasn't what he'd expected, but then again, he had a feeling that nothing about Evelyn Carter was going to be what he expected. And maybe, he thought as he dried the last plate and set it on the shelf, maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Outside, the stars were coming out, thousands of them, scattered across the sky like someone had thrown handfuls of diamonds into the darkness. In Pennsylvania, Evelyn had probably never seen stars like this. Too much light from the cities, too much smoke from the factories. But here, in this empty, windswept corner of Texas, the stars were so bright you could almost read by them. He hoped she'd see them. Hoped she'd look out her window and see all that vast darkness punctured by light, and maybe feel a little less afraid. Because if there was one thing he'd learned out here in the territory, it was this. Darkness always felt bigger when you were facing it alone. But when you had someone beside you, even a stranger, even someone you barely knew, it didn't seem quite so overwhelming. Tomorrow they'd start figuring out what came next, whether she'd stay or go, whether they'd marry or remain nothing more than housemates, whether the fragile threads of trust beginning to form between them would hold or snap under the weight of everything they were both carrying. But tonight, she was safe. She had a locked door and a soft bed and enough space to breathe without anyone watching. And for tonight, that would have to be enough. Colt banked the fire in the stove, turned down the lamps, and headed to his own room. He didn't lock his door. Wanted her to know that if she needed anything in the night, if she was scared, if she was hungry, if she just needed to know someone else was there, his door would be open. As he lay down on his narrow bed and listened to the familiar sounds of the house settling, the wind outside, the distant calls of night birds, he found himself thinking about that moment in town when she'd stepped off the stagecoach and he'd seen the fear in her eyes. "Darlin, I don't bite, not unless you ask." He'd said it without thinking, trying to lighten the moment, trying to show her he wasn't a threat. But now, lying in the dark, he realized what he'd really been saying. "I won't hurt you. Not now, not ever. Not unless you want me to stop being careful, stop keeping my distance, stop treating you like you might break. But that choice is yours, always yours. I won't bite unless you ask." And with that thought, Colt Maddox drifted off to sleep in his small house on the Texas prairie, while in the room next door, a woman from nowhere slowly began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found a place where the past couldn't reach her, where she could breathe without fear, where she could begin again. The first light of dawn came thin and gray through Evelyn's window, pulling her from a sleep that had been more exhaustion than rest. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. The room was unfamiliar, the sounds wrong, the air carrying scents of sage and dust instead of coal smoke and dampness. Then memory crashed back. Texas. The ranch. Colt Maddox. She sat up slowly, every muscle in her body protesting. 3 weeks of travel, of sleeping in hard beds and cramped train seats, had left her feeling like she'd been beaten all over again. The bruise on her face throbbed dully, a constant reminder of the night she'd finally escaped, when her father had caught her packing and his fist had found her cheekbone with practiced efficiency. The room was exactly as it had been last night, small, spare, but blessedly private. The key still sat on the dresser where she'd placed it before sleeping, and seeing it there sent a flutter of relief through her chest. She'd locked the door. She'd slept behind a locked door for the first time in months, and nothing had happened. No one had tried to break it down. No one had demanded entry. No one had punished her for the audacity of wanting safety. Outside her window, she could see the prairie turning gold in the early light, and beyond it, that massive cottonwood tree swaying gently in the morning breeze. Birds were singing, not the sparrows and pigeons of Philadelphia, but something wilder, their calls unfamiliar and strangely beautiful. She rose and poured water from the pitcher into the basin, gasping slightly at how cold it was. But the shock was welcome, clearing the fog from her mind as she washed her face and hands. She braided her hair simply, pinned it up, and smoothed down the wrinkles in her gray dress as best she could. In the cracked mirror, her reflection looked pale and uncertain, the bruise a violent splash of color across her face. This was her life now. This strange house, this vast emptiness, this man who said he didn't bite unless asked. She had no idea what any of it meant or how to navigate it. But she was here, and going back wasn't an option, so forward was the only direction left. Taking a breath, she unlocked the door and stepped into the main room. Colt was already up, standing at the stove with his back to her, and the smell of coffee filled the air. He was dressed in work clothes, canvas pants, a faded blue shirt, suspenders, and his dark hair was damp, like he'd already been out to the well. When he heard the door, he turned, and for just a second she saw surprise cross his face, like he hadn't expected her to emerge at all. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Coffee's ready, if you want some." "Thank you." She moved to the table carefully, hyper-aware of the space between them, of how he shifted slightly to give her more room as she passed. "You're up early." "Habit. Animals don't care if you're tired." He poured coffee into a chipped mug and set it in front of her, then returned to the stove where something was sizzling in a pan. "I'm making eggs. You want some? If it's not too much trouble." "No trouble. Got more eggs than I know what to do with. Chickens are overachievers." He said it casually, but she noticed the way he kept his movements slow and predictable, like he was trying not to startle her. "How'd you sleep?" "Well enough." It was a lie, but a polite one. She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, grateful for the warmth. "The bed is comfortable." "Good. That's good." He cracked 2 more eggs into the pan, and the silence stretched between them. Not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Just uncertain. Evelyn sipped her coffee and watched him work. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd been taking care of himself for a long time. No wasted motion, everything in its place. There was something oddly peaceful about it, watching someone cook without anger, without resentment, without the barely suppressed violence that had characterized every meal in her father's house. Here. He slid a plate in front of her, 3 eggs, fried, with a piece of toasted bread. Then he got his own and sat down across from her, but not directly across. At an angle, so they weren't quite facing each other head-on. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The eggs were good, simple, but cooked properly, seasoned with salt and pepper. Real food, not the stale crackers and hard cheese she'd been living on for weeks. "I thought," Colt said eventually, not looking up from his plate, "that maybe today I could show you around the place properly, introduce you to the animals, show you where everything is, if you're feeling up to it. I'd like that. And if you're not, that's fine too. You can rest or just sit on the porch or whatever you need." "Mr. Mad, Colt," she corrected herself, remembering his request from last night. "I appreciate your consideration, but I don't need to be handled with quite so much care. I'm not made of glass." He looked up at that, studying her face for a moment. "Didn't think you were. But I figure you've probably had enough of men telling you what you should or shouldn't do, so I'm trying to give you choices instead." The simplicity of it, the thoughtfulness, made her throat tighten unexpectedly. Yes, thank you." He nodded and went back to his eggs, and Evelyn found herself relaxing incrementally. This was manageable. This strange, careful dance they were doing. It wasn't what she'd expected, but maybe that was better. Maybe expectations were the problem in the first place. After breakfast, she helped him wash the dishes despite his protests, and then they stepped out into the morning. The heat was already building, the sun climbing higher, but there was a breeze that made it bearable. Colt settled his hat on his head and started toward the barn, and Evelyn followed, lifting her skirt slightly to keep them out of the dust. "This is Willow," he said, stopping at the first stall where a bay mare stood munching hay. "She's the sweetest-tempered horse you'll ever meet. You could probably ride her bareback with a piece of string for a bridle, and she'd take care of you." Evelyn extended her hand slowly, and Willow snuffled at her palm, then allowed herself to be petted. The mare's coat was soft, warm under her fingers, and for a moment Evelyn was transported back to childhood, to early mornings in her father's stable before everything had gone wrong, when her mother was still alive and the world had still made sense. "She's beautiful," Evelyn whispered. "She is. And this troublemaker," Colt moved to the next stall, "is Chester. He's got opinions about everything and he'll test you, but he's sound and he's smart. Just don't let him convince you he deserves extra oats. He's a con artist." The paint horse tossed his head as if offended by the characterization, and despite everything, Evelyn felt a smile tug at her lips. "And you've already met Rust," Colt continued, moving to where the roan gelding stood in the third stall. "He's half asleep most of the time, but he's steady. You could trust your life to him, and he wouldn't let you down." "How long have you had them?" "Willow and Rust came with the ranch. Chester I bought off a trader about 2 years ago. Paid too much for him, but I don't regret it." He stroked Rust's neck affectionately. "Like I said yesterday, you're welcome to ride any of them whenever you want. I can show you the trails, or you can explore on your own. Your choice." There was that phrase again, your choice, like he was trying to give her back something that had been taken from her. They left the barn and made a circuit of the property, the chicken coop where a dozen hens clucked and scratched, the pig pen where 2 enormous sows lounged in mud, the vegetable garden that Colt admitted was more weeds than vegetables at this point, because he was terrible at maintaining it. He showed her the creek, shaded by willows, where the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. He pointed out the property boundaries. About 160 acres, nothing fancy, but it's paid for, and it's ours, and explained his plans for eventually expanding the herd if he could get help with the work. Through it all, Evelyn listened and observed, trying to imagine herself here, trying to picture days filled with this quiet routine, this simple work. It was so different from everything she'd known, from the suffocating social obligations of Philadelphia, from the constant worry about money and reputation, from the violence that had lurked under the surface of every interaction with her father. "What do you think?" Colt asked finally, when they'd made their way back to the house and were standing in the shade of the cottonwood. "Still looks like the edge of the world?" "Yes," she said honestly. "But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe the edge is exactly where I need to be." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable under the shadow of his hat brim. "Can I ask you something?" Her stomach tightened. "All right." "Last night, you said your father's business partner had already buried 2 wives. Did you ever wonder what happened to them?" The question sent ice through her veins. "Every day, especially after I met him and saw the way he looked at me, like I was something he'd already purchased and was just waiting to claim." "You think he killed them?" "I don't know. No one ever said anything directly. But the first one died in a fall down the stairs, and the second one took ill very suddenly and was dead within a week. And both of them had looked terrified at social gatherings in the months before they died." She wrapped her arms around herself despite the heat. "Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was just bad luck. But I wasn't willing to find out." Colt was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. Finally he said, "I'm glad you ran. Whatever else happens, I'm glad you got away from that." "So am I." She looked up at the cottonwood, at the way its leaves rustled and shifted in the breeze. "When I was a little girl, I used to climb trees. My mother would scold me, say it wasn't ladylike, but she never really meant it. She'd just make sure my dress was clean before my father saw me." The memory was bittersweet, edged with loss. "After she died, my father forbade it, said I was too old for such nonsense. But I used to dream about it sometimes, being up high, hidden in branches, where no one could reach me." "You can climb that one if you want," Colt said, nodding at the cottonwood. "I won't tell anyone." She laughed, a real laugh this time, surprised and genuine. "In this dress? I'd tear it to pieces." "I've got an old shirt and some pants that might fit you." "Well, they'd be big, but you could roll them up." He shrugged. "Might be more practical for ranch work anyway, if you decide to help out." The offer was so unexpected, so casual, that for a moment she could only stare at him. Women didn't wear pants. It was scandalous, improper, the kind of thing that would have sent her father into an apoplectic rage. But her father was 1,000 miles away. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. "The clothes, I mean, for working, if you're certain you don't mind." "Why would I mind? They're just sitting in a trunk doing nothing." He started toward the house. "Come on, I'll find them for you." Inside, he rummaged through a chest in his room, the door left open, she noticed, maintaining that careful propriety, and emerged with a faded blue work shirt and a pair of canvas pants. "These were mine when I was younger, before I filled out. Should fit you better than my current clothes would." He handed them to her, not quite meeting her eyes. "You can change in your room. Take your time." She retreated to her bedroom and closed the door, then stood for a moment just holding the clothes. They smelled of cedar and dust, clean but long stored. The fabric was soft with age and washing, worn thin in places but still sound. Slowly she unbuttoned her gray dress and let it fall away. The corset beneath came next, and she breathed deeply for the first time in hours, feeling her ribs expand without restriction. The shift she left on for modesty, then pulled on the pants. They were too large in the waist, too long in the leg, but when she rolled the waistband and cuffs, they stayed up well enough. The shirt hung on her, but she tucked it in and rolled the sleeves, and when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like someone who might belong out here, someone who might survive. When she emerged, Colt glanced up from where he was mending a piece of tack and did a double take. For a second she thought she saw approval in his expression, but it was gone too quickly to be sure. "Better?" he asked. "Much better. I can actually breathe." "Good, because I could use some help this afternoon if you're willing. Nothing strenuous, just holding things while I work on fixing the gate to the corral. It's been hanging crooked for a month, and I keep putting it off because it's easier with 2 people." "I can do that." And so she found herself standing in the sun, holding a wooden post steady while Colt worked a new hinge into place, and it was perhaps the strangest afternoon of her life. Not because of the work, which was simple enough, but because of the casual companionship of it. The way he'd explain what he was doing without being condescending, the way he'd ask, "Can you shift it a bit to the left?" instead of "Move it, woman." The way he'd say, "Thanks, that's perfect," when she got it right. They worked in comfortable silence, punctuated by brief exchanges, and slowly, incrementally, Evelyn felt something in her chest begin to unknot. This was what partnership could look like, not ownership, not subjugation, just two people working together toward a common goal. "There," Colt said finally, stepping back to examine the gate. He swung it open and closed a few times, nodding with satisfaction. "That'll hold. Good job." "I didn't do much, just stood there." "You did exactly what I needed you to do. That counts." He wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "It's getting toward supper time. You hungry?" She was, she realized. Actually hungry, not just forcing herself to eat because she knew she should. "Yes." "How do you feel about venison? Dutch brought some by last week, and I've got more than I can eat on my own." "I've never had it." His eyebrows rose. "Never? Well then, you're in for a treat, or you'll hate it. It's kind of divisive." He grinned, and it transformed his face, made him look younger and less careworn. "Come on, let's see if I can make a decent impression." Back in the house, she watched him prepare the meal with the same efficient competence he brought to everything else. He sliced the venison thin, dredged it in flour and spices, and fried it in a cast-iron skillet while she set the table and sliced bread. It felt strangely domestic, strangely normal, like they'd been doing this for years instead of barely 24 hours. When they sat down to eat, the meat was tender and flavorful, gamey but not unpleasantly so. Evelyn found herself eating with actual appetite, not just mechanically putting food in her mouth. "It's good," she said. "Really good. Dutch is a good hunter, better than me anyway. I can shoot well enough, but he's got the patience for tracking." Colt paused, then added, "He'll probably want to meet you, by the way. He's curious about the woman who answered my advertisement." Anxiety spiked through her. Will he think it's strange? That we haven't gotten married yet? Probably. But Dutch has known me long enough not to be surprised when I do things my own way. He met her eyes across the table. "I told you before, there's no timeline here. We do things when and if it feels right, not because some calendar or convention says we should. Most men wouldn't be so patient. Most men are fools." He said it matter-of-factly, without arrogance. "Besides, what would be the point in rushing? You'd just be miserable, and I'd feel like a bastard, and we'd both end up hating each other. Better to take our time and see if we can actually stand each other first." "I don't hate you," Evelyn said quietly. "That's a good start, then." He smiled slightly. "I don't hate you either, for what it's worth." After supper, as the sky turned from blue to purple to deep indigo, they sat on the porch in two mismatched chairs Colt dragged out from inside. The air was finally cooling, the oppressive heat of the day giving way to a pleasant warmth. Crickets sang in the grass, and somewhere in the distance an owl called. "I've never seen so many stars," Evelyn whispered, staring up at the vast sweep of the Milky Way splashed across the darkness like spilled milk. "It's something, isn't it? Out here, you can see the whole universe spread out. Makes you feel small, but in a good way, like your problems aren't quite as big as they seemed." She thought about that, about her father, about the business partner with his dead wives, about the bruise on her face and the fear that had driven her halfway across the continent. From here, under this enormous sky, it all felt very far away. Not gone, not forgotten, but distant, manageable. "Colt?" she said after a while. "Yeah? Thank you for today, for the clothes, for the work, for the meal, for treating me like a person instead of a problem to be solved." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you were used to, being treated like a problem?" "That, or property, but never really like a person with thoughts and feelings that mattered." "That's a damn shame." He said it softly, but there was steel underneath. "You matter, Evelyn. Your thoughts, your feelings, your choices, they all matter. Don't let anyone tell you different. Not me. Not anyone." She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. She'd cried enough. She was done crying. "I'm trying to believe that. It'll take time, but you'll get there." He stood stretching. "I should probably turn in. Morning comes early out here. But you can stay out as long as you want. Enjoy the stars." "Good night, Colt." "Good night, Evelyn." He disappeared inside, and she heard the quiet sounds of him banking the fire, closing shutters, settling in for the night. But he didn't close his door. She could see the faint glow of his lamp through the window, and somehow that felt important. He wasn't shutting her out, wasn't demanding her presence or her absence, just existing in parallel, leaving space for her to do the same. She sat on the porch until the moon rose, a silver sickle hanging low on the horizon, and thought about what it meant to feel safe. Really safe, not just temporarily unharmed. It was a strange sensation, unfamiliar and almost uncomfortable, like wearing new shoes that didn't quite fit yet, but might, with time. When she finally went inside, she paused at Colt's door. He was lying on his narrow bed, still dressed, reading a book by lamplight. He looked up when her shadow fell across the doorway. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes, I just wanted to say, this is the first day in a very long time that I haven't been afraid. So thank you for that." His expression softened. "You're welcome. Sleep well." "You too." She locked her door that night, but it felt different. Not like barricading herself against a threat, but like claiming a space that was hers. A small act of ownership, of agency. And when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed not of falling downstairs, or of men with cold eyes and colder hands, but of climbing trees, of being up high where the wind could reach her and the sun could warm her face, of being somewhere safe enough to dare such heights. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Colt would wake with the sun and start his chores, and Evelyn would join him after washing and dressing. Always in the borrowed work clothes now, having gratefully abandoned her heavy dresses for the freedom of canvas and cotton. They'd work together in companionable near silence, feeding animals and mending fences and pulling weeds from the struggling garden. She learned the quirks of each animal, how the chickens had a strict pecking order and would squabble viciously if it was disrupted, how the pigs would roll over for belly rubs like enormous dogs, how Chester the paint horse would try to steal tools from Colt's back pocket if he wasn't paying attention. She learned the sounds of the prairie, the different bird calls, and the way the wind changed pitch depending on the weather coming. She learned that her hands could blister and callous and become strong. And slowly, carefully, she learned Colt. He was a man of few words but consistent actions. If he said he'd do something, he did it. If he made a promise, he kept it. He was patient with her when she didn't understand something, never condescending, always willing to explain or demonstrate. He gave her space when she needed it, and companionship when she sought it, somehow intuiting which was which without her having to say. "You're quiet today," he observed one afternoon as they repaired a section of fence that had been damaged by cattle rubbing against it. "Everything okay?" Evelyn hammered another nail into the post before answering. "I was just thinking about my father, about what he'd say if he could see me now, in pants, doing manual labor, living in sin with a man I'm not married to." "We're not living in sin. You've got your room, I've got mine. We're just cohabitating, respectfully." He wouldn't see the distinction. "Good thing he's not here, then." Colt tested the fence to make sure it was solid. "Do you miss him?" "Your father?" "No." The word came out harder than she'd intended. "I miss what I thought he was before I understood what he really was. I miss having a parent, the idea of a parent. But the actual man? No, I don't miss him at all." "That's fair. My old man was a bastard too. Mean drunk who'd hit anything that moved when he was in his cups. I left home at 14 and never looked back." "Is he still alive?" "Don't know. Don't care." He moved to the next section of fence. "Figured out a long time ago that blood doesn't mean much if there's no love behind it. Family's who you choose, not who you're stuck with." The simple wisdom of it struck her. Family was who you chose. What a radical concept. What a freeing one. "Is that why you never married before?" she asked. "Because you were waiting to choose instead of settle?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought maybe she'd overstepped, pushed into territory he didn't want to explore. But then he said, "Partly that. Partly I was just alone for so long I forgot what it was like to need someone else. Got good at being solitary." He glanced at her. "But turns out there's a difference between being alone and being lonely, and I was the second one pretending to be the first." "I understand that." She held a post steady while he nailed it. "In my father's house, I was never alone." There were always servants, always social obligations, always people around. But I was desperately lonely. I think that's worse somehow, being surrounded by people and still feeling utterly isolated. You don't feel that way here? She considered the question honestly. No. Even when we're not talking, even when we're just working side by side in silence, I don't feel alone. I feel accompanied. Is that strange? Not to me. He straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. I've felt more comfortable with you in the past week than I have with most people I've known for years. The confession hung between them, vulnerable and true. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest, some final barrier beginning to crack. That night, she left her door unlocked. Not open, she wasn't ready for that yet, but unlocked. A small gesture of trust, of belief that she was safe here, that Colt meant what he said about respecting her boundaries. She slept more soundly than she had in years. Morning broke with the sound of hoofbeats, fast and urgent, shattering the quiet rhythm they'd built over the past 2 weeks. Evelyn was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard them, and her body went rigid with instinctive fear before her mind could catch up. Through the window, she saw a rider approaching at a gallop, dust billowing behind him, and for one terrible moment she was certain it was someone from back east, someone her father had sent to drag her home. But Colt appeared from the barn, relaxed and waving, and she realized this must be the neighbor he'd mentioned, Dutch Harrison. She watched them talk, too far away to hear the words, but she could read urgency in the stranger's posture, in the way he gestured emphatically toward the north. Colt's stance changed, shoulders tensing, and he turned to look back at the house. Even from this distance, she could see the concern on his face. Then both men were striding toward the house, and Evelyn found herself backing away from the window, smoothing down the work shirt she'd been wearing, suddenly conscious of how improper she must look. But there was no time to change. The door swung open and Colt entered, followed by a wiry man with gray-streaked hair and sharp blue eyes that immediately found her and assessed her in one sweeping glance. "Evelyn, this is Dutch Harrison. Dutch, Evelyn Carter." Colt's voice was clipped, distracted. "Dutch says there's a man in town asking questions about a woman who came in on the stage a couple weeks back. Eastern accent, well-dressed, throwing money around." The coffee cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room tilted sideways, and she grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. He'd found her. After everything, after 1,000 miles and 3 weeks of running, somehow, he'd found her. "Hey, easy now, easy." But Colt was beside her suddenly, his hand on her elbow, steadying but not restraining. "Sit down, just breathe." "I can't. He can't." The words wouldn't form properly. Her chest was too tight, her lungs refusing to work. "I have to leave. I have to run again. I can't let him. Nobody's taking you anywhere." Colt's voice was low and firm, anchoring her. "You hear me? Nobody." Dutch pulled out a chair and Colt guided her into it, then crouched in front of her so they were eye level. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, caging her in but not touching her, giving her something solid to focus on. "Look at me," he said. "Evelyn, look at me." She forced her gaze to his face, to those storm-gray eyes that had been nothing but kind to her. "Is this the man your father wanted you to marry?" She nodded, still struggling to breathe properly. "What's his name?" "Marcus. Marcus Thornwood." The name tasted like ash in her mouth. "He's wealthy, connected. He probably hired investigators, private detectives. I thought I'd been careful. I thought you were careful." Colt's voice was steady, calm, the eye of the hurricane. "But determined men with money can find almost anyone. That's not your fault." He glanced up at Dutch. "What's he saying in town?" "That he's looking for his fiancée, who ran away due to a misunderstanding. Says she's not well, not thinking clearly, that her father's worried sick about her." Dutch's expression was skeptical. "He's offering a reward for information about her whereabouts. $100. Evelyn made a choked sound. "That's more than most people in Dust River see in 6 months. Someone will tell him. Someone will—" "Tucker won't," Dutch interrupted. "The stage driver. He was in the saloon when Thornwood was asking around. Soon as the man left, Tucker came to find me, knowing I'm your nearest neighbor. Said something about that fellow didn't sit right with him, the way he talked about you, like you were property he'd misplaced. Tucker told you? Colt asked. Told me to warn you. Said he didn't see nothing, didn't remember no woman getting off his stage, and if anyone asks him, he'll keep on not remembering. Dutch's weathered face softened slightly as he looked at Evelyn. You've got friends here, girl, more than you know. But $100. There's people in this world who can't be bought, Colt said. Tucker's one of them. Dutch is another, and I sure as hell am a third. He stood, his jaw set in a way that made him look dangerous. How long before he figures out to come here? Hard to say. He was asking about ranchers in the area, places a woman alone might go. Someone might mention your name, might mention you were looking for a wife. Dutch pulled out his tobacco pouch and started rolling a cigarette, his movements casual despite the tension in the room. Could be today, could be tomorrow. Might never make the connection at all if we're lucky. I don't bet on luck. Colt started pacing, thinking, if he comes here, we need a story. Something that explains her presence, that doesn't give him grounds to make a claim. We could say I'm your wife, Evelyn heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, distant. If we're married, he can't take me back. He'd have no legal right. Marriage doesn't always stop men like that, Dutch said quietly, lighting his cigarette, especially if he's got money for lawyers. But it's something. It's a barrier. She looked at Colt, trying to read his expression. Unless you don't want to, I wouldn't blame you. This isn't what you signed up for when you sent that advertisement. He stopped pacing and stared at her. You think I'd throw you to that wolf just to avoid complications? I think you're a good man who didn't ask to get caught up in someone else's disaster. Evelyn. He crouched in front of her again, and this time he did touch her, his hands covering hers where they gripped the chair. His palms were warm, calloused, steady. I meant what I said that first day. Nobody takes you anywhere you don't want to go, not on my watch. If getting married is what it takes to keep you safe, then we'll get married. Just like that? Just like that. Dutch cleared his throat. I hate to be practical at a moment like this, but if you're going to do it, you should do it now, today. Get the paperwork filed before Thornwood shows up. Makes it harder for him to contest if it's already legal and official. Colt nodded slowly. Can you ride to town, find Judge Morrison? Tell him we need him to come out here, that it's urgent? I can do that. But Colt, Dutch's expression was serious. You sure about this? Marriage is binding. You'll be tied to each other legal and proper. I know what marriage is, Dutch. And you, miss. Dutch turned to Evelyn. You understand what you're agreeing to? Out here, a man's got rights over his wife, legal rights. Even good men can turn bad when they think they own something. Evelyn looked at Colt, really looked at him. At the worry in his eyes that was for her, not for himself. At the set of his shoulders that said he'd fight anyone who tried to hurt her. At the hands that had never once been raised to her in anger, only offered in help. I trust him, she said simply. Dutch studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. All right then. I'll fetch the judge. Should be back by early afternoon if he's available. He headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing, both of you. After he left, silence fell over the kitchen like a blanket. Evelyn became aware that Colt was still holding her hands, and that she was holding his back, fingers intertwined. She should probably let go. It wasn't proper. But proper seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. Are you sure? She whispered. This is forever, Colt. You'll be stuck with me. Stuck isn't the word I'd use. He squeezed her hands gently. Evelyn, I was planning to ask you to marry me eventually anyway. This just speeds up the timeline. A pause. Unless you don't want to. If you'd rather run again, I'll help you. I'll give you money, horses, whatever you need. You've got choices here. She thought about running, about climbing back on a stage or a train, about putting more miles between herself and Marcus Thornwood, about starting over somewhere else. But she was so tired of running, so tired of being afraid. And more than that, she didn't want to leave. Not this place, not this strange, quiet life she'd been building, not this man who treated her like she mattered. I want to stay, she said. I want to marry you. If you're truly willing. I'm willing. He smiled, and there was relief in it. Though I should warn you, I don't have a ring or flowers or any of the things you're supposed to have for a proposal. I don't need those things. I just need to know I'm safe. You are. I promise you that. He stood, pulling her up with him, and for a moment they just stood there holding hands in the kitchen with broken pottery at their feet. We should probably clean this up and maybe put on something nicer than work clothes for the ceremony. She looked down at herself and laughed, slightly hysterical. I'm getting married in borrowed pants. Hey, those pants look good on you. His tone was light, trying to ease the tension. But you might want to wear your dress, for the legal part at least. They cleaned up the shattered cup together, working in the synchronized way they developed over the past weeks, and then retreated to their separate rooms to change. Evelyn pulled out her gray dress, the one she'd arrived in, the only proper dress she owned, and hesitated. It was wrinkled, travel-stained, more suited to a funeral than a wedding, but it was all she had. She washed her face and hands carefully, pinned her hair up in a style that was almost elegant, and tried to ignore the way her hands were shaking. She was getting married, to a man she'd known for 2 weeks, because a monster from her past was hunting her, and this was the only way to stay safe. It wasn't how she'd imagined her wedding day as a girl, but then very little in her life had gone according to plan. When she emerged, Colt was in the main room wearing what must have been his church clothes, a white shirt that was only slightly yellowed with age, dark pants without patches, suspenders instead of a belt. His hair was damp and slicked back, and he'd shaved, the sharp line of his jaw more pronounced without the usual stubble. You look nice, she said. So do you. He cleared his throat awkwardly. Listen, before the judge gets here, we should probably talk about what happens after, the sleeping arrangements and such. Heat flooded her face. Oh, yes, that. I don't expect anything to change, he said quickly. You keep your room, I keep mine. The only difference is the paperwork and what we tell people. I wouldn't. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying the careful combing. Hell, I'm making a mess of this. You're saying the marriage will be in name only. For now, for as long as you need it to be. He met her eyes. Someday, maybe, if you wanted. But that's not now. That's not today. Today is just about keeping you safe. The knot in her chest loosened slightly. Thank you. They waited together in the main room, not talking much, both of them too nervous and wired for conversation. Evelyn kept going to the window, watching the road, jumping at every sound. Part of her expected Marcus Thornwood to come galloping up at any moment, to arrive before the judge did, to ruin everything. But the road stayed empty except for heat shimmer and dust devils. Finally, around 1 o'clock, 2 riders appeared, Dutch on his horse and an older man on a mule, Judge Morrison, white-haired and portly, with a face like a friendly bulldog. Well now, the judge said as he dismounted with a grunt, Dutch tells me we have an urgent wedding to perform. Can't say I've had many of those. Usually folks take their time about getting hitched. His sharp eyes moved from Colt to Evelyn and back again. This above board? Both of you here of your own free will? Yes, sir, Colt said. Miss? The judge looked at Evelyn. Any reason you're rushing into this that I should know about? She thought about lying, about making up some romantic story about love at first sight. But something in the judge's expression told her he'd see right through it. There's a man from back east who thinks he has a claim on me. We're marrying to prevent that claim from having any legal standing. Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. Does this man have a legitimate claim? My father promised me to him in marriage, but I never consented. I left before the wedding could take place. And you're sure you want to marry Mr. Maddox instead? I'm sure. The judge studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right then. I've seen enough arranged marriages gone sour to know when a woman's running from something. If you say Colt here is the better option, I believe you. Let's get this done. He pulled a worn Bible from his saddlebag. Dutch, you'll stand witness? Happy to. They gathered in the shade of the cottonwood tree, the 4 of them standing in a rough circle. The judge opened his Bible and cleared his throat. We're gathered here in the sight of God, and these witnesses to join Colton James Maddox and Evelyn Margaret Carter in holy matrimony. This is not a union to be entered into lightly, but with reverence and respect. He looked at Colt. Do you, Colton, Take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, till death do you part. Colt's voice was steady. I do. And do you, Evelyn, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, till death do you part. She looked at Colt, at this man who'd given her safety, respect, kindness, without asking for anything in return, who was standing here promising to protect her even though it complicated his life immeasurably. I do. By the power vested in me by the territory of Texas, I pronounce you husband and wife. Colt, you may kiss your bride. Or not, given the circumstances. Up to you, folks. There was an awkward pause. Evelyn saw something flicker across Colt's face. Uncertainty, maybe, or desire quickly suppressed. Then he took one of her hands and raised it to his lips, pressing a chaste kiss to her knuckles. Mrs. Maddox, he said softly. Mr. Maddox, she replied, and felt tears prick her eyes. Well, that's that, Judge Morrison said cheerfully, pulling out paperwork. Just need you both to sign here and Dutch to witness, and I'll file this with the county clerk first thing tomorrow. He laid the document on a flat rock and handed Colt a pen. Make it official. They signed. Evelyn Carter becoming Evelyn Maddox with a few scratches of ink, and Dutch added his signature as witness. The judge blotted the document carefully, folded it, and tucked it into his saddlebag. Congratulations, he said, shaking both their hands. I'd say you should celebrate, but Dutch tells me you're expecting trouble. If this Eastern fellow shows up making claims, you send for me. I'll set him straight on the legal facts. Thank you, Your Honor, Colt said. We appreciate you coming out on short notice. Part of the job. Besides, it's not often I get to help someone escape a bad situation. He nodded to Evelyn. You take care of yourself, young lady, and Colt, you take care of her. I intend to. After the judge left, Dutch lingered. I can stay if you want. Extra gun hand in case your visitor shows up today. We'd appreciate that, Colt said, though I'm hoping he won't come at all. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Dutch pulled his rifle from his saddle scabbard. I'll keep watch from the barn. Got a good view of the road from up in the loft. He headed off, leaving Colt and Evelyn alone under the cottonwood tree. The branches rustled overhead, casting shifting shadows across the ground. A mockingbird sang somewhere nearby, oblivious to the human drama unfolding below. Well, Colt said after a moment, we're married. We are. Evelyn twisted the bare ring finger on her left hand. She should have a ring, she thought, absurdly, but there hadn't been time or money for such things. I'm sorry this isn't what you wanted, a real wedding, a real marriage. It's real enough. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the afternoon heat. Evelyn, listen to me. Whatever else happens, whatever complications this brings, I don't regret it. You understand? I don't regret marrying you. You might, later, when you realize you're trapped. The only one who was trapped was you. Back east with that bastard and your father. This? He gestured between them. This is a choice we both made. That's different. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But years of conditioning, of being told she was a burden and a disappointment, made trust difficult. I should make us some lunch, she said, needing something practical to focus on. Dutch will be hungry. Good idea. I'll help. They went inside together, and the domestic normalcy of making sandwiches and coffee felt surreal, given everything that had just happened. She was married now. She was Mrs. Colton Maddox. The name felt strange in her mind, foreign but not unpleasant. What was your mother's name? She asked suddenly as she sliced bread. Colt looked up from the coffee pot. My mother? Why? I just realized I don't know anything about your family, your history. We're married, and I don't even know where you were born. He set the pot on the stove. Born in Missouri, grew up on a dirt farm that barely produced enough to keep us fed. My mother's name was Sarah. She died when I was 12. Fever took her. My father fell apart after that, started drinking heavy. Had 3 older sisters, but they all married and left as soon as they could. I stuck it out till I was 14, then lit out on my own. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was recounting someone else's story. Worked cattle drives, ranch hand jobs, whatever I could get. Saved every penny. Bought this place when I was 24, and I've been here ever since. That's 10 years of being alone. More or less. Dutch moved in next door about 5 years ago, so I had some company after that. But yeah, mostly alone. He met her eyes. What about you? Tell me about your mother. Evelyn smiled sadly. Her name was Catherine. She was gentle, kind, completely unsuited to being married to my father. I think she loved him once before he showed his true nature. By the time I was old enough to understand, she was just resigned, going through the motions. She paused, remembering. She died when I was 15. The doctor said it was her heart, but I think she just gave up. She'd been fading for years. And your father got worse after she was gone? Much worse. She'd been the only thing tempering him. Without her, Evelyn set down the knife, her hands trembling. The first time he hit me was a week after her funeral. I'd asked if I could keep her music box, this little porcelain thing she loved, and he said I was being selfish, that she wouldn't want me to have it. When I argued, he backhanded me across the face. Colt's knuckles went white where he gripped the counter. How old were you? 15, almost 16. She picked up the knife again, needing something to do with her hands. It got worse from there. Not all the time. Sometimes weeks would go by and he'd be almost normal. But then something would set him off and she shrugged. You've seen the results. Jesus, Evelyn. The worst part was that everyone knew. Our neighbors, his business associates, the servants. Everyone knew and no one did anything. Because he was respectable. Because he was wealthy. Because I was just a woman and women don't matter as much as a man's reputation. You matter, he said it fiercely. You've always mattered. They were just too blind and cowardly to see it. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the anger in his eyes. But it wasn't directed at her. It was for her. Righteous fury on her behalf at the injustices she'd endured. Thank you, she whispered. They ate lunch with Dutch, who reported that the road had stayed quiet. No riders, no visitors, no sign of Marcus Thornwood. By late afternoon, they began to relax slightly. Maybe he'd gone in a different direction. Maybe someone had steered him wrong deliberately. Maybe they'd gotten lucky. But as the sun started its descent toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of amber and gold, Dutch called down from the barn loft. Rider coming, single horse, moving at a walk. Well-dressed from the look of him. Evelyn felt her blood turn to ice. Colt was at her side immediately. Go inside, lock yourself in your room. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. No. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not giving him that power. Evelyn, I'm your wife now, legally. Let me stand beside you. She met his eyes, pleading. Please. I need to face him. I need to show him I'm not afraid anymore. He looked torn, clearly wanting to protect her, but understanding what she was asking for. Finally, he nodded. All right, but you stay behind me. And if things go bad, you run. Promise me. I promise. They walked out to the front of the house together. Dutch emerged from the barn carrying his rifle, taking up a position near the corral. The three of them waited as the rider approached, and with each hoofbeat, Evelyn felt her heart hammering harder against her ribs. Then he was there, pulling his horse to a stop 20 feet from the porch. Marcus Thornwood looked exactly as she remembered, tall, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit that seemed absurd out here in the dust and heat, dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. He was handsome in a cold, calculated way, like a statue carved from marble. His eyes found her immediately, and something possessive flashed across his face. Evelyn? His voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of reproach. There you are. Your father has been beside himself with worry. Mr. Thornwood? She was proud that her voice didn't shake. I'm surprised to see you've come all this way. Of course I came. When my fiancé runs off in a moment of feminine hysteria, what else am I to do? He dismounted, moving with practiced grace. I've come to bring you home, my dear, to where you belong. Colt stepped forward, placing himself between Marcus and Evelyn. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Mr. Thornwood. Evelyn isn't your fiancée. She's my wife. Marcus went very still. Your wife. That's right. We were married this afternoon by Judge Morrison. It's all legal and recorded. So whatever agreement you had with her father, it's void now. I see. Marcus's expression didn't change, but Evelyn saw his hands clench briefly before relaxing. How convenient. And how long have you known my Evelyn? She's not your anything, Colt said evenly. She's Mrs. Maddox, and we've known each other long enough to know we want to spend our lives together. Is that so? Marcus finally looked directly at Colt, and Evelyn saw the assessment happening, the way he evaluated and dismissed Colt as beneath him in one glance. Tell me, Evelyn, does this cowboy know about your father's debts? About the money I've already paid for you? Evelyn felt sick. You paid him? Of course, $50,000 to settle his accounts, with the understanding that you would become my wife. It was a business arrangement, properly negotiated and agreed upon. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. So you see, my dear, you're quite literally bought and paid for. You're mine by contract, and no hastily arranged frontier wedding changes that. Actually, said a new voice, it changes everything. They all turned to see Judge Morrison riding up on his mule, with Tucker the stage driver beside him on a rangy sorrel horse. Your Honor, Marcus said smoothly, recovering quickly. How opportune. Perhaps you can explain to these people the legal complexities of contracts and parental rights. I could, the judge said, dismounting with a grunt, but I'd rather explain that in the territory of Texas, a woman over the age of 18 cannot be sold or contracted into marriage against her will. What your agreement with her father bought you was nothing, Mr. Thornwood, because Evelyn never consented. She was never legally bound to you. Her father had no right to sell her like property. This isn't the Dark Ages. Judge Morrison pulled out the marriage certificate. This, however, is legal, signed, witnessed, and as of 1 hour ago, officially filed with the county. Evelyn Carter is now Evelyn Maddox, wife of Colton Maddox, and any claim you think you have ends right there. Marcus's facade finally cracked, anger flashing across his face. She's not well. She's clearly been coerced, manipulated by these frontier opportunists who saw an innocent woman alone and vulnerable. I wasn't coerced, Evelyn said, stepping out from behind Colt. Her legs felt like water, but she forced herself to stand straight, to meet Marcus's eyes. I came here of my own free will. I married Colt of my own free will. The only person who ever tried to coerce me was you and my father. Evelyn, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. For the first time in my life, I'm being reasonable. You're a man who's buried 2 wives under suspicious circumstances, and my father tried to sell me to you to cover his gambling debts. Coming here, building a life with Colt, that's the most reasonable thing I've ever done. Marcus took a step toward her and immediately found himself facing 3 rifles, Colt's, Dutch's, and Tucker's, all raised and aimed. That's far enough, Colt said quietly, and there was something deadly in his voice that Evelyn had never heard before. You've had your say. Now it's time for you to leave. You're making a mistake, Evelyn, Marcus said, ignoring the guns pointed at him. You think life out here will be better? You'll be dead from childbirth or disease or simple hardship within 5 years. You'll regret this. Maybe, Evelyn said, but at least I'll die free. For a long moment, no one moved. The standoff stretched out, tension thick enough to cut. Then Marcus's expression went cold and flat, all pretense of civility dropping away. Keep her then, he said. Damaged goods, used up by frontier trash. You're welcome to her. He looked at Evelyn one last time. When you come crawling back east begging for help, don't expect any mercy. I won't be crawling anywhere, she said. Goodbye, Marcus. He mounted his horse with sharp, angry movements and wheeled around. They watched him ride away, his back rigid with fury, until he was just a dark speck disappearing into the dusk. Evelyn felt her knees give out. Colt caught her, one arm around her waist, holding her up. I've got you, and he murmured. I've got you. It's over. Is it? She looked up at him, searching his face. He won't just give up. Men like him don't. Maybe not, Judge Morrison said, but he's got no legal standing here, and I'll make sure every judge and lawman in 3 counties knows about this situation. If he tries anything, he'll be the one facing consequences. He tipped his hat to Evelyn. You're safe, Mrs. Maddox. That's a promise. Tucker nodded agreement. And if he comes back around Dust River, I'll personally see to it he gets pointed in the wrong direction. Permanently. Thank you, Evelyn whispered. All of you. I don't know how to repay. No repayment needed, Tucker said gruffly. Just live your life, ma'am. Be happy. That's payment enough. After the judge and Tucker left, Dutch lingered just long enough to make sure they were all right, then headed back to his own ranch with a promise to check in tomorrow. Finally, blessedly, Colt and Evelyn were alone. They stood in the gathering darkness, still in their wedding clothes, and Evelyn felt the adrenaline that had been sustaining her finally drain away. She sagged against Colt and he held her, just held her, while she shook with reaction. It's over, he said again, his voice low and soothing. He's gone. You're safe. I faced him. She pulled back slightly to look at Colt's face. I stood there and I told him no. I've never done that before. I've always just endured. But today I fought back. You were incredible. There was pride in his eyes and something else. Something warmer. You're the bravest person I've ever met, Evelyn Maddox. Evelyn Maddox. The name still felt strange, but hearing him say it sent warmth through her chest. We should go inside, she said. It's getting dark. Inside, Colt lit the lamps while Evelyn sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly exhausted down to her bones. Her wedding day. She'd gotten married, faced down her demons, and somehow survived both. I should change, she said, looking down at her wrinkled dress. These are my only good clothes and I've probably ruined them. They're fine. You're fine. Colt poured her a glass of water and set it in front of her. Drink this. Then maybe you should rest. It's been a hell of a day. She drank obediently, then looked up at him. What about you? Are you all right? Me? I'm fine. Colt, you got married today too. To a woman being hunted by a dangerous man. That's not nothing. He pulled out the other chair and sat down across from her, close enough that their knees almost touched. Evelyn, I need you to understand something. When I sent that advertisement, when I asked for a wife, I knew I might get someone with complications. Someone running from something. Hell, most people who come west are running from something. He reached across the table and took her hand. You're not a burden. You're not a problem I got stuck with. You're exactly what I asked for. Someone strong enough to survive, brave enough to keep going, honest enough to be straight with me. The fact that you come with a past? Everyone does. At least yours makes sense. You're too good, she whispered. I'm just decent. There's a difference. He squeezed her hand. Now, we're both dead on our feet. Let's get some sleep. Tomorrow we can figure out what normal looks like for us. They stood, still holding hands, and walked to their respective bedroom doors. At the threshold of hers, Evelyn paused. Colt? Yeah? Thank you for everything. For marrying me, for protecting me, for treating me like I matter. You do matter. Don't ever forget that. She went into her room and changed into her nightgown, then lay down on the bed without bothering to braid her hair. Through the thin walls, she could hear Colt moving around in his room, the creak of floorboards, the soft sounds of him settling in for the night. She was married now, to a good man, a kind man. A man who'd stood up to Marcus Thornwood without hesitation, who'd promised to keep her safe and then done exactly that. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time in her entire life, Evelyn felt something that wasn't fear or resignation or desperate hope. She felt gratitude, deep, overwhelming gratitude that her desperate gamble had paid off, that her 1,000-mile journey had ended here, in this small house on the Texas prairie with a man who saw her as a person worth protecting. Sleep took her quickly, pulling her down into darkness that for once held no nightmares, only the peaceful exhaustion of survival and the quiet knowledge that tomorrow, when she woke, she would still be safe, still home. The days after Marcus Thornwood's departure settled into something that felt almost like peace, though Evelyn couldn't quite shake the sensation of waiting for the other shoe to drop. She kept expecting him to return with lawyers or lawmen or simply more threats. But the road remained empty except for the occasional tumbleweed and the dust devils that danced across the prairie in the afternoon heat. Life continued in its quiet rhythm. She and Colt fell back into their routine of morning chores and shared meals, but something had shifted between them. Small things mostly. The way his hand would linger on her elbow when he helped her over rough ground, The way she found herself sitting closer to him at the table. The way they'd started saying goodnight at their bedroom doors instead of from across the room. They were married now, legally bound, and both of them seemed to be trying to figure out what that meant beyond the paperwork. It was Dutch who finally broke the careful bubble they'd been living in. He rode over one morning about 2 weeks after the confrontation, his expression unusually serious as he dismounted. "Got news from town," he said without preamble. "Thought you'd want to hear it straight." Evelyn's stomach dropped. She was helping Colt repair a section of the chicken coop, and she set down her hammer with hands that had gone suddenly cold. "Thornwood?" Colt asked, straightening. "In a manner of speaking. Tucker heard from a friend who works the telegraph office in Fort Worth. Seems your Mr. Thornwood sent a telegram east before he left Texas, to Evelyn's father." "What did it say?" Evelyn's voice came out thin, reedy. "Just that he'd located you, but you'd married someone else and were refusing to return. Said he'd done his due diligence, but couldn't force you." Dutch pulled his hat off, running a hand through his graying hair. "There was a response that came back yesterday. Your father disowned you, said as far as he's concerned, you're dead to him. No daughter of his would act with such ingratitude and disrespect." The words should have hurt, should have felt like a knife between her ribs. But instead, Evelyn felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. Pure, dizzying relief. "He disowned me," she repeated. Official-like. The telegraph operator said he was pretty specific about it. Said you were cut off from the family, no inheritance, no support, nothing. Dutch watched her carefully, clearly trying to gauge her reaction. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Maddox. I know that's hard to hear." "It's not." She started laughing, high and slightly wild, and saw both men exchange worried glances. "Don't you see? He's given up. He's washing his hands of me. That means he won't send anyone else looking. I'm free. Actually free." Colt stepped closer, his hand finding the small of her back. "You're sure that's how you feel about it?" "I'm sure. My father stopped being my father the day my mother died. Maybe before that. This just makes it official." She looked up at him, and there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. "I'm free, Colt. He can't touch me anymore." "Well then," Dutch said, relaxing slightly, "I guess that calls for a celebration. You folks have any of that whiskey left that I brought over at Christmas?" They did, and they spent the afternoon on the porch drinking cheap whiskey that burned going down and laughing about things that probably weren't that funny, but felt hilarious in the moment. Dutch told stories about his days as a school teacher, about the children who'd driven him to drink, and the parents who'd driven him west. Colt contributed tales of cattle drives and stubborn livestock, and the time he'd accidentally gotten drunk with a circuit preacher who'd turned out to be running from a warrant in New Mexico. Evelyn mostly listened, soaking in the easy camaraderie, the way they included her without making her perform or prove herself worthy of inclusion. This was what family could be, she realized, not blood and obligation, but choice and companionship. By the time Dutch rode home in the golden light of early evening, she felt lighter than she had in years, maybe ever. "Thank you for this," she said to Colt as they stood watching Dutch disappear down the road. "For what? Getting you tipsy on rotgut whiskey?" "For giving me a reason to celebrate instead of mourn. For making my father's rejection feel like a gift instead of a loss." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "You deserve good things, Evelyn. You deserve to be happy. I hope being here, being married to me, I hope that's not just the lesser of two evils." "It's not. It's—" She struggled to find the words. "It's the first time I've felt like myself, like I can breathe and think and just exist without being afraid of what comes next." "Good." He cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. "That's good. I'm glad." They stood there in the cooling evening air, close but not quite touching, and Evelyn felt the pull between them like a physical thing. It had been growing stronger over the weeks, this awareness, this wanting. She'd catch herself watching him work, admiring the strength in his shoulders and the gentleness in his hands. She'd notice the way his eyes would track her movements across a room, the way his jaw would tighten when she stretched or bent or did anything that drew attention to her body. They wanted each other. That much was obvious. But the gulf between wanting and acting felt impossibly wide, fraught with questions about timing and expectations, and whether either of them was ready for that kind of vulnerability. "I should start supper," she said finally, breaking the moment. "Let me help." They worked together in the kitchen, moving around each other with practiced ease, and Evelyn found herself hyper-aware of every accidental touch, his hand brushing hers when they both reached for the salt, his hip bumping hers when he moved past her to the stove, the way their shoulders pressed together when they stood side by side washing vegetables. "Evelyn," he said suddenly, setting down the knife he'd been using, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy? Here, I mean, with this life, with me?" She turned to face him fully. "Yes, more than I ever thought I could be." "Why?" "Because sometimes I look at you and I think about everything you gave up. The life you had back east, even if it was bad. It was still familiar. You knew how to navigate it. Out here you're learning everything from scratch, working harder than you ever did, living in a house that's too small with too few comforts." He rubbed the back of his neck, uncomfortable. "I guess I'm asking if you have regrets." "Do you?" she countered. "Do you regret marrying me?" "No, never." "Then why would I regret it?" "Colt, every morning I wake up without fear is a gift. Every meal I eat without having to calculate how to survive the conversation is a blessing. Every night I go to sleep knowing I'm safe. That's worth more than all the fine houses and fancy dresses in Philadelphia. But eventually you might want more. You might get tired of this simple life, and I don't know if I can give you more than what you see here." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I don't want more. I want this. I want simple. I want honest work and quiet evenings, and waking up knowing the person I live with treats me with respect." She hesitated, then pushed forward. "I want you." The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Colt went very still. "Evelyn, I know we said this would be a name only. I know you're trying to give me time and space, and I appreciate that. I do. But Colt, I'm ready. I'm ready to be your wife in every sense of the word, if you still want me. If I—" He laughed, short and sharp. "Christ, Evelyn, I've wanted you since the day you stepped off that stage looking scared and brave and so damn beautiful it hurt. But I didn't want to push, didn't want to be another man taking something from you instead of waiting to be given it. I'm giving it now. I'm giving myself. Freely. Because I want to, not because I have to." He reached up slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The bruise had faded weeks ago, leaving only clear skin, and the way he touched her, like she was precious, like she mattered, made her throat tight. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I've never been more sure of anything." He kissed her then, gentle and questioning, and she answered by pressing closer, her hands finding his shoulders, his chest, the strong line of his back. The kiss deepened and she felt heat bloom through her body, want and need, and something sweeter she wasn't quite ready to name. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. "Not here," he said quietly, "not standing in the kitchen like we're in a rush. You deserve better than that." "I don't need better. I just need you. You're getting both." He took her hand, fingers interlacing with hers. "Come on." He led her to his room, larger than hers, with a bigger bed and a window that looked out toward the creek. The lamp was already lit, casting warm golden light across the simple furnishings. He closed the door behind them, then turned to face her. "Last chance to change your mind," he said. "No judgment if you do. We can walk right back out that door and have supper, like nothing happened." "I'm not changing my mind." "Then come here." She went to him and he kissed her again, less gentle this time, more urgent. His hands moved to the buttons of her work shirt, his shirt, really, that she'd been wearing for weeks, and he paused. "This all right?" "Yes. Keep going, please." He undressed her slowly, reverently, pressing kisses to each new bit of skin he revealed. When she stood before him in nothing but her shift, she felt exposed but not ashamed. The way he looked at her wasn't possessive or crude. It was wonder. "You're so damn beautiful," he murmured. "I'm not. I'm too thin, too pale. You're perfect." He silenced her protests with another kiss. "You're strong and brave and absolutely perfect." She helped him with his clothes, her hands trembling slightly as she unbuttoned his shirt and pushed it off his shoulders. His chest was broad and scarred. She could see the old whip marks he'd told her about, the newer injury from the shoulder wound, various other marks from a life of hard work and harder luck. She traced them gently, these physical records of his survival. "You're beautiful too," she whispered. He laughed softly. "I'm a scarred-up cowboy with more muscle than sense." "You're the best man I've ever known." That seemed to undo something in him. He pulled her close, skin to skin, and the feeling of it, the intimacy, the trust, made her eyes sting with tears. When was the last time someone had touched her with anything other than violence? When was the last time she'd felt safe enough to be this vulnerable? He lifted her easily, laying her on the bed with a gentleness that belied his strength. And then he was beside her, kissing her throat, her collarbone, the hollow behind her ear that made her gasp. "Tell me if anything doesn't feel right," he said against her skin. "Tell me if you need me to stop or slow down or change what I'm doing. This is for both of us, but especially for you." "I will. I promise." What followed was a revelation. He took his time, learning her body with patient attention, finding the places that made her sigh and the touches that made her arch into him. When she tensed at certain movements, muscle memory from bad experiences rising up, he'd immediately still, waiting for her to breathe through it and relax again. He let her explore too, her hands mapping the planes of his chest and back, discovering what made him groan or shudder. When they finally came together, it was with a slowness that felt like worship. He watched her face the entire time, reading her reactions, adjusting to what she needed. There was discomfort at first. It had been a long time, and the memories attached to the act weren't good ones, but Colt was patient, murmuring reassurances, kissing away the tension until gradually, impossibly, discomfort gave way to pleasure. "Okay?" he asked, his voice strained with the effort of holding back. "Yes, more than okay. Don't stop." He didn't. He moved with her, adjusting their rhythm until she was meeting him thrust for thrust, her hands gripping his shoulders, her breath coming in gasps. The pleasure built slowly, a warmth spreading through her body that had nothing to do with heat and everything to do with connection, with trust, with being seen and wanted for exactly who she was. When release finally hit her, it was like falling and flying at the same time, her body arching up into his as waves of sensation rolled through her. He followed moments later, her name on his lips, and then they were collapsing together into the tangled sheets, hearts pounding, skin slick with sweat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Colt rolled to the side, pulling her with him so she was tucked against his chest, his arm around her waist. She could feel his heartbeat gradually slowing, matching her own. "You all right?" he asked finally. "I'm more than all right." She tilted her head back to look at him. I didn't know it could be like that." "Like what?" "Safe. Beautiful. Like something I wanted instead of something I had to endure." His arm tightened around her. "It should always be like that. Always." They lay together in the lamplight, and Evelyn felt something fundamental shift inside her. This was what intimacy could be. Not a weapon or a duty or a price to be paid, but a gift exchanged between equals. A choice made freely on both sides. "I love you," she whispered before she could stop herself. She felt him go still, and panic flared. Too soon. She'd said it too soon. She'd ruined the moment. "I love you too," he said quietly. "Have for a while now, if I'm being honest. Just didn't know if you'd want to hear it." "I want to hear it. I want to hear it every day for the rest of my life." "Then you will." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Every damn day, Evelyn Maddox. I promise you that." They fell asleep like that, tangled together in Colt's bed. And when Evelyn woke briefly in the middle of the night, disoriented and momentarily afraid, she felt his hand find hers in the darkness and squeeze gently. A wordless reminder that she was safe, that she was home, that she was loved. She squeezed back and let sleep take her again. The next morning they woke to the sound of rain. Actual rain, the first they'd had in weeks, drumming on the roof and turning the world outside the window into a gray-green blur. Evelyn stretched, feeling muscles protest in new and interesting ways, and became aware that she was still in Colt's bed, still naked, and that he was watching her with an expression that was equal parts affection and desire. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning." She felt heat rise in her cheeks, suddenly shy despite everything they'd done the night before. "It's raining." "Good. The land needs it." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "How do you feel?" "Sore. Happy. A little overwhelmed." She smiled. "But good. Really good. Good enough for breakfast, because I'm starving." They got dressed, Evelyn stealing one of his shirts when she couldn't immediately find her own, and stumbled into the kitchen like newlyweds on a real honeymoon. The rain continued its steady percussion, and they made breakfast together, bumping into each other more than necessary, stealing kisses between stirring eggs and toasting bread. It was perfect. Simple and ordinary, and absolutely perfect. "I was thinking," Colt said as they sat down to eat, "that maybe we should think about expanding the house, adding a proper bedroom, maybe a sitting room. Make this place feel less like a bachelor's cabin and more like a home. I like it the way it is. But if we're going to have children someday—" He stopped, looking suddenly uncertain. "I mean, if that's something you'd want. I know we haven't talked about it. I'd want that." The certainty of it surprised her. A month ago, the idea of bringing children into the world had seemed like a nightmare. How could she protect them when she couldn't even protect herself? But now, imagining a child with Colt's eyes or her smile, teaching them to ride horses and climb trees and be brave. "Yes, someday, when we're ready." His smile could have lit up the whole prairie. "Yeah? Yeah." They finished breakfast in companionable silence, and then Colt announced he needed to check on the animals despite the rain. Evelyn offered to help, but he waved her off. "Stay inside where it's dry. I'll be back in an hour, then maybe we can spend the rest of the day doing absolutely nothing productive." "That sounds perfect." He kissed her, a long, slow kiss that promised more later, and then headed out into the rain. Evelyn watched him go, then turned to survey the kitchen. The dishes needed washing, and there was mending to do, and the floor could use sweeping, all the small mundane tasks that made up a life. She found herself smiling as she filled the basin with water. This was her life now. These were her tasks, her choices, her home. Not a prison or a burden, but a gift she'd fought hard to claim. She was washing the last plate when she heard hoofbeats approaching, fast, urgent, splashing through the mud. Her heart jumped immediately to her throat. Had Marcus come back? Had her father sent someone else? But when she looked out the window, it was Dutch, riding hard despite the rain, his face grim. She met him at the door, anxiety spiking. "What's wrong? Is someone hurt?" "Where's Colt?" Dutch asked, dismounting quickly. "In the barn. Dutch. What's happened?" "Fire." He was already striding toward the barn. "Big one. Started about an hour ago in the grass north of my property. With this wind and the dry conditions before the rain, it's spreading fast. We need every able body to help create fire breaks before it reaches the ranches." Fire. The word sent ice through her veins. She'd heard about prairie fires, about how they could devour everything in their path, moving faster than a horse could run, how they left nothing behind but ash and death. Colt emerged from the barn at a run, already understanding the situation from Dutch's presence. "How bad?" "Bad. We've got maybe 3-4 hours if we're lucky, but we need to start now." "I'll saddle up." "Evelyn, I'm coming with you." "No, it's too dangerous. You stay here where it's safe." "If the fire reaches here, nowhere is safe." She grabbed her coat from inside. "I can help dig fire breaks. I can carry water. I can do something." "She's right," Dutch said. "We need everyone. No offense, Mrs. Maddox, but this isn't the time for chivalry. It's time for survival." Colt looked torn, clearly wanting to protect her but understanding the logic. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but you stay close to me. You don't take risks. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." They saddled the horses quickly, Willow for her, Rust for Colt, Chester for Dutch's extra mount, and rode north through the rain that was already beginning to taper off. The closer they got to Dutch's property, the more Evelyn could smell it. Smoke, acrid and thick, carried on the wind. Then they crested a rise, and she saw it. A wall of flames stretched across the horizon, maybe 2 miles away, consuming the dry grass with terrifying speed. Even with the rain, even with the dampened ground, it was advancing like a living thing, hungry and relentless. The sky above it was black with smoke, and she could hear it now, a roar like distant thunder, punctuated by sharp cracks as the fire found something particularly combustible. "Jesus," she whispered. "Come on." Colt spurred Rust forward. "We don't have much time." They reached Dutch's ranch to find a dozen men already there, neighbors from surrounding properties, all grim-faced and determined. There was no formal organization, no real plan beyond the basics. Dig trenches, clear away dry brush, create breaks in the fuel that would hopefully slow or stop the fire's advance. Evelyn found herself working alongside men she'd never met, all of them too focused on survival to care about introductions or propriety. They dug with shovels and axes, clearing vegetation in a wide strip that stretched between the approaching fire and Dutch's property line. Her hands blistered within the first hour, her back screaming in protest, but she kept going because everyone kept going because stopping meant losing everything. The fire drew closer. She could feel the heat of it now, waves of scorching air that made breathing difficult. Embers drifted down like malevolent snow, starting spot fires that had to be beaten out immediately with wet sacks or smothered with dirt. The roar grew louder, drowning out shouted instructions, and the smoke made her eyes water and her throat raw. "Back!" someone yelled. "Everyone back behind the fire break." They retreated to the cleared strip, watching as the wall of flame bore down on them. Evelyn found herself pressed against Colt's side, his arm around her waist, both of them filthy and exhausted and terrified. If the fire break didn't hold, they'd have to run for the creek and hope they could get there before the fire caught them. The flames hit the cleared ground, and for a moment it seemed like they would just jump the gap, that all their work had been for nothing, but then, miraculously, they began to slow. Without fuel, the fire started to eat itself, turning back on already burned ground, losing momentum. The wall of flame that had seemed unstoppable began to fragment, to break apart into smaller fires that could be fought and beaten. "It's working," Dutch shouted. "Keep those spot fires down. Don't let anything catch." They fought for another 2 hours, racing to stomp out embers and small blazes before they could grow into something larger. By the time the fire finally burned itself out against their defensive line and the returning rain, Evelyn could barely stand. Her clothes were singed and soaked, her hands bloody and blistered, her lungs burning from smoke inhalation. But they'd won. The ranches were safe. "Everyone all right?" Dutch called out, and received exhausted affirmatives from around the group. "Then let's get home before we all collapse. Tomorrow we'll assess the damage and help anyone who needs it." The ride back to their ranch felt endless. Evelyn swayed in the saddle, held upright more by Willow's steady gait than her own strength. When they finally reached home, Colt had to help her dismount because her legs wouldn't hold her. "Come on," he murmured, supporting her weight. "Let's get you inside." She let him guide her into the house, let him sit her down at the kitchen table, let him tend to her blistered hands with gentle efficiency. She was too tired to do anything but accept his care, too wrung out to protest or insist she could handle it herself. "You were incredible today," he said as he wrapped clean cloth around her palms. "Brave and strong and absolutely incredible." I was terrified the entire time. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. He finished with her hands and moved to wet a cloth, using it to wipe smoke and ash from her face. "You saved lives today, Evelyn. Dutch's ranch, maybe others. You should be proud." "I'm just glad everyone's safe." She caught his hand. "Including you. When I saw how close that fire was getting, I thought..." Her voice broke. "Hey, I'm all right. We're all right." He pulled her into his arms, and she pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the smell of him beneath the smoke and sweat. "We're all right." They sat like that for a long time, just holding each other, grateful to be alive and together and safe. Eventually, Colt coaxed her into eating something, just bread and cheese, nothing that required cooking, and then helped her to bed. Not his bed, but hers, because she was too exhausted for anything but sleep. "I'll be right next door if you need me," he said, kissing her forehead. "Stay." She caught his hand. "Please, I don't want to be alone tonight." So he did, stretching out beside her on top of the blankets, fully clothed, just offering his presence. She fell asleep with her hand in his, listening to him breathe, and dreamed of fire that couldn't touch them because they stood together in a place the flames couldn't reach. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the rain having washed the smoke from the sky. Evelyn woke to find Colt already up, and when she emerged from her room, she found him at the stove making breakfast with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I was trampled by a herd of cattle." She looked at her bandaged hands. "But alive. Grateful to be alive." "Same." He set a plate of eggs in front of her. "Dutch sent word that he's organizing a barn raising next week. The Petersons' place caught some fire damage and they lost their barn. Whole community's going to help rebuild. We'll be there." He smiled at her certainty, at the way she said "we" without hesitation. "Yeah, we will." They ate together in the morning light, and Evelyn thought about the past 24 hours. The intimacy and joy of the night before, the terror and triumph of the fire, the way crisis had shown her just how strong she'd become, and how deeply she'd woven herself into the fabric of this place. This was home now. Not just the house or the land, but the community, the shared struggles, the way neighbors showed up for each other without being asked. She'd found something here she'd never had in Philadelphia's grand houses and social circles. Genuine connection. People who valued her for what she could do and who she was, not what family she came from or how much money she had. "Colt?" she said. "Yeah, I'm happy. Truly, deeply happy. I wanted you to know that." He reached across the table and took her bandaged hand gently in his. "I'm happy too. Happiest I've ever been, if I'm being honest. Even with all the complications I brought with me. Especially with those, because they brought me you." She smiled, and it felt like the sun breaking through clouds. "I love you. I love you too." He squeezed her hand carefully. "Now finish your breakfast. We've got a full day ahead, and I need my wife at full strength." My wife. The word sent warmth through her chest. She was his wife, truly now in every sense. And he was her husband, her partner, her protector, her home. Whatever challenges came next, and there would be challenges, she knew that, they'd face them together. Just like they'd faced Marcus Thornwood, just like they'd faced the fire. Together, strong, unbreakable. She finished her breakfast and rose to help with the dishes, and through the window she could see the cottonwood tree swaying in the morning breeze, its leaves catching the light. The tree that had survived decades of drought and storms and change, that kept growing toward the sun no matter what tried to uproot it. Like them, she thought, like us. And with Colt beside her, his shoulder brushing hers as they worked, she knew with bone-deep certainty that they would keep growing too, keep reaching for the light, keep surviving whatever came their way. Because that's what love did. It gave you roots strong enough to weather any storm, and wings brave enough to keep reaching for better days. The weeks after the fire brought a change to the rhythm of their days, something deeper and more settled than before. Evelyn's hands healed slowly, the blisters giving way to new calluses that spoke of work and purpose. She and Colt moved through their routines with an ease that felt almost choreographed, morning chores done side by side, meals shared with comfortable conversation, evenings spent on the porch watching the sun paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. And at night, they shared a bed. Not hers, not his, but theirs. The distinction felt important, like they were building something entirely new rather than simply combining what had existed before. It was on one of these evenings, about a month after the fire, that Dutch rode over with news that made Evelyn's blood run cold all over again. "Got a letter from Tucker," Dutch said, dismounting near the porch where she and Colt sat watching the sunset. "Thought you'd want to see it." Colt took the envelope, his expression darkening as he scanned the contents. Then he looked up at Evelyn, something complicated in his eyes. "Marcus Thornwood is dead." The words hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn felt the world tilt slightly. her mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. What? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. He died 3 weeks ago, back in Philadelphia. Apparently he fell down a flight of stairs in his home, broke his neck. Colt handed her the letter. Tucker thought we should know, given the history. Evelyn read the carefully penned words, her hands shaking. Marcus Thornwood, prominent businessman, found dead at the bottom of the grand staircase in his manor house. No witnesses. The servants reported hearing a cry and a crash late one evening. The investigation concluded it was a tragic accident, likely caused by too much brandy and poor lighting. His third wife to die from a fall, she said numbly. Except this time it was him. Poetic justice, some might say, Dutch offered, then seemed to reconsider. Though I suppose speaking ill of the dead isn't Christian. He was a monster, Evelyn said flatly. I'm not going to pretend to mourn him. Colt set the letter aside and took her hand. How do you feel? She thought about it, really examined the swirl of emotions in her chest. Relief, certainly. A grim satisfaction that the man who'd tried to purchase her like property had met an ignoble end. But also something unexpected. A kind of grief. Not for Marcus himself, but for all the women who hadn't escaped him. The 2 who'd died as his wives, and however many others he might have heard over the years. I feel free, she said finally. Like a door I didn't even know was still open has finally closed. He can't come back. He can't send lawyers or private detectives or use his money and influence to cause problems. It's over. Really, truly over. Good. Colt squeezed her hand. Then we can stop looking over our shoulders and just live. Dutch stayed for supper, and they raised glasses of whiskey and what Evelyn supposed was technically a toast to the dead, though it felt more like a celebration of survival. After he left, she and Colt stood together on the porch, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. You know what this means? She said quietly. What? No one's looking for me anymore. My father disowned me. Marcus is dead. I'm not running from anything. I'm just here, by choice. She felt him smile against her hair. Best kind of here there is. I want to write to my mother's sister, Aunt Caroline. She was always kind to me, but my father forbade contact after my mother died. Now that he's disowned me, maybe she'd be willing to correspond. I'd like her to know I'm safe and happy. Then write to her. Hell, if she wants to visit, we've got room. We could build that addition I mentioned. Evelyn turned in his arms to face him. You do that? Expand the house? Been thinking about it anyway, especially if we're going to start a family. His hand moved to rest on her stomach, the gesture tentative but hopeful. Speaking of which, have you? Not yet. It's too soon to know. But Colt, if I am, when I am, I want you to know I'm not afraid, not anymore. I used to think bringing a child into the world would be terrifying because I'd have to protect them from people like my father, like Marcus. But now I think about raising them here, teaching them to be strong and kind and brave, and I'm excited instead of scared. They'd be lucky to have you as a mother. We'd be lucky to have them. She rose on her toes to kiss him. Come to bed. I want to celebrate being free with my husband. He laughed and swept her up into his arms, carrying her inside while she shrieked with surprised delight. They made love that night with joy instead of just passion, with laughter mixed in among the sighs and gasps. And afterward they lay tangled together, making plans for a future that finally felt real and permanent. The barn raising for the Petersons happened the following week, and Evelyn was struck by how the entire community turned out. Men, women, children, everyone contributed something. The men worked on the actual construction while the women organized food and supplies, but the lines blurred throughout the day. Evelyn found herself handing up boards to Colt while Mrs. Peterson helped steady a beam, while Judge Morrison's wife operated a saw with the confidence of long practice. It was during the communal lunch, sitting in the shade with a plate of food and surrounded by the cheerful chaos of dozens of conversations, that a young woman approached Evelyn hesitantly. Mrs. Maddox, I'm Sarah Peterson. This is our barn you're all helping rebuild. Evelyn stood immediately, wiping her hands. It's good to meet you properly. I'm sorry about the fire damage. Could have been so much worse. If not for the fire breaks, if not for everyone coming to help. Sarah's eyes welled with tears. I don't know how to thank everyone. You don't need to thank us. This is what neighbors do. I heard you were there that day, fighting the fire even though you'd only been in Texas a few weeks. That took courage. Evelyn glanced over to where Colt was working, his shirt off in the heat, muscles straining as he lifted a heavy beam. Someone I love was in danger. The land we're building a life on was threatened. Of course I helped. Sarah followed her gaze and smiled knowingly. You two seem happy, really happy, not just putting on appearances happy. We are. Happier than I ever thought possible. Good. That's how it should be. Sarah squeezed her arm. Welcome to Dust River, Mrs. Maddox. I think you're going to fit in just fine. As Sarah moved away to tend to other guests, Evelyn felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. She belonged here. These people had accepted her without question, without judgment, treating her as one of their own simply because she'd shown up and been willing to work alongside them. The barn went up in 2 days, a testament to the efficiency of many hands working toward a common goal. At the end of the second day, as everyone was packing up tools and preparing to head home, Peterson climbed up on a hay bale and called for attention. I just want to say thank you, he called out, his voice thick with emotion. To every one of you who showed up, who gave your time and your sweat and your skills. You didn't have to do this. But you did. Because that's who we are out here. We take care of our own. His gaze swept across the assembled crowd. And that includes you, Mrs. Maddox, you and Colt both. You're family now, just like everyone else here. Don't forget that. A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd, and Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. She'd spent her whole life in Philadelphia society and never once felt like she belonged. But here, in this dusty corner of Texas, surrounded by people who valued action over pedigree, she'd found her place. The ride home was quiet, both of them tired but satisfied. As they approached their property, Evelyn noticed something she hadn't before. The way the setting sun caught the cottonwood tree, making it glow like it was lit from within. The tree that had been here long before them and would likely be here long after, bearing witness to all the small human dramas that unfolded in its shade. Let's get married again, she said suddenly. Colt pulled Russ to a stop and looked at her confused. We're already married. I know, but that ceremony was rushed, born out of fear and necessity. I want to do it again, properly this time. Not because we have to, but because we want to. A real wedding, with our community there, celebrating the choice we're making to stay together. Understanding dawned on his face, followed by a smile that made her heart skip. You want to renew our vows. Yes, under that tree, in the spring, when everything's green and growing, with Dutch and the Petersons and Judge Morrison and everyone who's become our family. I think that's a beautiful idea. He leaned over in his saddle to kiss her. Spring it is, then. We'll do it right this time. They spent the rest of the fall preparing. Colt started work on the house addition, a proper bedroom with space for a cradle, and a small sitting room where Evelyn could have her own space for reading and correspondence. She wrote to her Aunt Caroline a long letter explaining everything that had happened and was overjoyed when a response came 6 weeks later. Her aunt had been horrified by her father's treatment, delighted by her marriage, and promised to visit in the summer if her health permitted. Winter came gently that year, bringing cold but not the harsh blizzards that sometimes swept across the plains. Evelyn and Colt spent the long evenings by the fire, making plans and dreaming out loud about the future. She taught him to read better. His education had ended early, but he was sharp and eager to learn. He taught her about the stars, about reading weather patterns, about the dozens of small skills that made survival on the prairie possible. And in February, when she was absolutely certain, she told him she was pregnant. He cried. This strong, stoic man who'd faced down Marcus Thornwood and fought prairie fires without flinching, he cried with joy and held her so gently, like she might shatter, and whispered promises against her hair about the kind of father he'd be, the kind of life they'd build for their child. You're going to be an amazing mother, he said. We're going to be amazing parents, she corrected, together. Spring arrived in a rush of green and wildflowers, transforming the brown prairie into something alive and vibrant. The addition to the house was finished just in time. and Evelyn spent happy hours arranging furniture and imagining the baby who would sleep in that cradle, who would take their first steps across that floor. The vow renewal was set for the first Sunday in May, when the cottonwood tree was in full leaf and the weather was warm but not yet oppressively hot. Evelyn wore a dress that Mrs. Peterson and Sarah had helped her make. Simple white cotton, high-waisted to accommodate her slowly growing belly, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She wove wildflowers into her hair and stood barefoot in the grass, feeling more beautiful than she ever had in Philadelphia's finest fashions. Colt wore his best clothes, the same ones from their first wedding, but he'd added something new, a carved wooden ring that Dutch had helped him make, polished smooth and fitted perfectly to Evelyn's finger. "It's from the cottonwood," he explained as he showed it to her the night before the ceremony. "A branch that came down in a storm last winter. I carved it myself, tried to make it as perfect as I could. It's not gold or silver, but it's perfect," she interrupted. "It's from this place, from the tree that's been watching over us. I wouldn't want anything else." The ceremony itself was nothing like her first wedding, and everything she'd ever wanted. Judge Morrison officiated again, but this time they weren't rushed or frightened. Dutch stood as best man, Sarah Peterson as matron of honor. The whole community gathered in their yard, forming a loose circle around the cottonwood tree. "We're here today," Judge Morrison began, "to witness something rare and beautiful. Two people who chose each other once out of necessity and are choosing each other again out of love. Colton, Evelyn, you've already spoken the legal words that bind you. Today, I invite you to speak the words of your hearts." Colt took her hands, his grip steady and sure. "Evelyn, when you stepped off that stage 3 seasons ago, you were the bravest person I'd ever seen. You were scared and hurt and running from things I couldn't imagine, but you were still standing, still fighting. I married you that first time to protect you, but I'd marry you 100 more times just for the privilege of standing beside you. You've made this house a home. You've made this life worth living, and you're giving me a gift I never dared to dream of, a family, a future, a reason to be better than I was." His voice cracked. "I love you. I'll love you till my last breath and whatever comes after. That's my vow." Evelyn swallowed hard, trying to find words that could match the depth of what she felt. "Colt, you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever, the ability to trust. You showed me that kindness wasn't a trap, that strength didn't have to mean violence, that I could be vulnerable without being destroyed. You've never tried to own me or control me. You've just loved me, steadily and quietly, like it's the easiest thing in the world. Because of you, I'm not afraid anymore. Because of you, I know what home feels like." She squeezed his hands. "I choose you. Today, tomorrow, for all the days I'm given. That's my vow." Judge Morrison smiled. "By the power that's already vested in me and in the presence of this community who loves you both, I affirm what you've just promised each other. You are husband and wife, partners and equals, bound by choice and love. Colt, you may kiss your bride. Again." The kiss was deep and sweet and filled with promise, and when they finally broke apart, the crowd erupted in cheers. Dutch produced a fiddle from somewhere and began to play, and suddenly there was music and dancing, food appearing from wagons and baskets, children running wild through the grass while adults laughed and celebrated. It was nothing like the rigid, formal affairs Evelyn had attended in Philadelphia. It was better. It was real. She danced with Colt under the cottonwood tree, both of them barefoot in the grass, and then with Dutch, and then with Peterson, and then with Judge Morrison, who was surprisingly light on his feet. She ate cake that Sarah had baked and punch that someone had spiked with whiskey, and she laughed until her sides hurt. As the sun began to set and people started heading home, calling out final congratulations and well wishes, Evelyn found herself standing alone under the tree for a moment, one hand resting on her small belly, looking out at the prairie that stretched endlessly in all directions. A year ago, she'd been trapped in her father's house, terrified and hopeless, with no way out that she could see. Now she was here, married to a good man, carrying his child, surrounded by people who valued her, standing on land that was hers by choice and by love. "You all right?" Colt appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "I'm more than all right. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "No regrets about leaving Philadelphia? About giving up that life?" She turned to face him fully, taking his face in her hands. I didn't give up anything that mattered. I traded a gilded cage for the whole sky. I traded fear for freedom. I traded existing for living. If that's not the best trade in the world, I don't know what is. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I'm glad you got on that stage. So am I. They stood together as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed her arrival and would witness everything that came after. The cottonwood rustled above them, its leaves whispering secrets only the wind could understand. Tell me about the future, Evelyn said. Tell me what you see for us. Colt settled his chin on top of her head, his arms wrapped around her from behind, his hands resting on her belly. I see a baby born in late summer. I see you rocking them under this tree while I work in the field. I see them learning to walk, to talk, to ride horses. Maybe more babies after that, if we're lucky. I see us growing old together, watching our children grow up and have children of their own. I see us sitting on that porch when we're gray and tired, holding hands and remembering the day you arrived, how scared we both were, how impossibly lucky we got. That sounds perfect. What do you see? She thought about it, letting herself really imagine the years stretching ahead. I see the same things, but I also see something else. I see myself becoming the person I was always meant to be but never had the chance to become before. Strong and capable and unafraid. I see us building something here that lasts beyond us. Not just land and buildings, but a legacy of kindness and respect and choosing love even when it's hard. I see our children growing up knowing they're valued for who they are, not what they can provide. I see a home full of laughter instead of fear. We can do that, Colt said. We are doing that. Yes, we are. The last of their guests departed, Dutch, the final straggler who waved goodbye with a promise to check on them in a few days. The prairie settled into its evening sounds, crickets and nightbirds, the distant call of a coyote, the wind moving through grass that was already growing tall again after the fire. They went inside together, to the house that had become a home, to the bed they'd built together through trust and patience and love. And as they lay tangled in each other's arms, Evelyn thought about journeys and destinations, about how sometimes the scariest leap led to the softest landing. She'd come to Texas as a mail-order bride, running from violence and desperation, with nothing but a battered carpetbag and a prayer that things could be different. She'd found a man who didn't bite unless asked, who gave her choices instead of commands, who showed her that love didn't have to hurt. And in finding him, she'd found herself. The months that followed were full of ordinary magic. Evelyn's belly grew round and full, and Colt talked to it constantly, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the horses, and how loved they already were. They finished the nursery together, painting the walls a soft yellow and hanging curtains that Aunt Caroline sent as a gift, along with a letter saying she'd visit after the baby was born. Summer arrived with its familiar heat, and on an August evening, when the air was thick and still, Evelyn went into labor. Dutch rode for the midwife while Colt stayed by her side, holding her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement when she was certain she couldn't go on. You can do this, he said. You're the strongest person I know. You can do anything. And she did. Just after midnight, as the stars wheeled overhead and the cottonwood whispered in the darkness, she brought their daughter into the world. The baby's first cry was strong and healthy, and when the midwife placed the tiny, squalling bundle in Evelyn's arms, she felt her heart crack open in a way she hadn't known was possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome home." Colt sat beside them on the bed, one arm around Evelyn, one finger gently held in his daughter's tiny fist, and he was crying again. "She's perfect. You're both perfect." "What should we name her?" Evelyn asked. They discussed names for months, but never quite decided. Now, looking down at this small miracle they'd created, Evelyn knew what felt right. "Catherine," she said, "after my mother. Catherine Sarah, after both our mothers. So they're part of this new beginning. Catherine Sarah Maddox." Colt tested the name, then nodded. "It's perfect. She's perfect." They stayed like that until dawn broke. The three of them cocooned in lamplight and wonder, beginning the next chapter of their story together. Catherine grew fast and fearless, with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. By the time she was 2, she was following Colt around the ranch like a determined shadow, trying to help with chores in ways that were more hindrance than help, but that he never complained about. Evelyn would watch them from the porch, her husband and her daughter working side by side in the sun, and feel so grateful she sometimes couldn't breathe with it. Aunt Caroline did visit, staying for 3 months and becoming such an integral part of their lives that they invited her to move in permanently. She accepted, bringing with her the few possessions she still had from Evelyn's mother, including the music box that Evelyn's father had forbidden her to keep. Evelyn cried when she saw it, touching the delicate porcelain with trembling fingers, and that night she wound it up and let Catherine listen to its tinkling melody. "This belonged to your grandmother," she told her daughter. "She was kind and gentle, and she would have loved you so much." More children came, a son they named James, then twin girls they named Grace and Hope. The house expanded again, growing organically as their family grew, each addition representing another chapter of their life together. Catherine learned to ride before she could properly walk, and grew up racing across the prairie with the wind in her hair and absolutely no fear. James was quieter, more thoughtful, with Colt's gentle way with animals and Evelyn's love of books. The twins were chaos incarnate, always getting into mischief, always laughing. Evelyn taught them all to read and write and think critically. Colt taught them to work hard and treat people with respect and never judge someone by their station in life. Together, they raised children who were confident without being cruel, strong without being hard, capable of both independence and compassion. The ranch prospered, not wealthy by Philadelphia standards, but successful in the ways that mattered: good land, healthy animals, neighbors they could count on, children who were loved and safe. Dutch became Uncle Dutch, a fixture at their table and in their lives until he passed peacefully in his sleep at age 72, leaving his land to the Maddox family with a note that said simply, "Take care of it. You've always been the family I chose." But Judge Morrison married Catherine to a young rancher from 3 counties over, and the wedding was held under the cottonwood tree, continuing a tradition. James eventually took over running the ranch when Colt's joints got too stiff for the daily work. The twins both became teachers, traveling to surrounding communities and eventually starting a school in Dust River itself. And through it all, Evelyn and Colt remained what they'd always been: partners, equals, best friends who'd chosen each other and kept choosing each other even when it was hard, even when life threw challenges their way, even when age slowed them down and changed their bodies. They grew old together under that cottonwood tree, watching their grandchildren play in the same grass where they danced at their second wedding, where Evelyn had first felt safe enough to breathe freely. Their hands, once smooth or rough with different kinds of work, became equally weathered and marked by time. But they still fit together perfectly. On an autumn evening when Evelyn was 73 and Colt 75, they sat together on the porch in the rocking chairs their children had made for them. The sky was doing that thing it did sometimes, painting itself in impossible colors, purple and orange and pink and gold all bleeding together like a watercolor. "Do you remember the day you arrived?" Colt asked, his voice thinner now, but still steady. "You were so scared, had that bruise on your face and terror in your eyes." "I remember. I was convinced you were going to be just like my father, just like Marcus." She squeezed his hand. "Shows what I knew. I was terrified too. Thought for sure you'd take one look at this place and get right back on that stage. Best decision I ever made, staying. Best decision I ever made, sending that advertisement." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. 50 years. Can you believe it's been 50 years? Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like we've always been together, like there was never a time before us. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower. From inside the house, they could hear their great-granddaughter, Catherine's granddaughter, practicing piano, the notes floating out through the open windows. Evelyn had finally gotten a piano 5 years ago, a gift from all their children pooled together, and she'd cried for an hour when they'd surprised her with it. "Evelyn?" Colt's voice was quiet. "Yes?" "I need you to know something, in case I don't get to say it again." "Don't talk like that." "Hush, let me speak. I need you to know that every single day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, even the days we fought or struggled or couldn't figure things out. All of it, every moment. You took a broken-down cowboy who thought he'd die alone, and you gave him a life worth living. You gave him children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You gave him 50 years of waking up next to the woman he loves. That's more than most people get in 10 lifetimes. Evelyn felt tears slip down her weathered cheeks. You gave me the same thing. You gave me freedom and safety and love. You showed me what it meant to be truly seen and valued. You gave me a home. We gave each other a home. Yes, we did. The stars were emerging now, those same stars that had witnessed their first night together, their vow renewal, the births of their children, every important moment of their shared life, constant and eternal, watching over the small human dramas that unfolded beneath them. The tree's still standing, Colt observed, nodding toward the cottonwood. All these years, all these storms, and it's still standing. Like us. Like us. They sat together until the night grew cold and their daughter-in-law came out to coax them inside for supper. The house was full of people, 3 generations living under one roof by choice, because they'd built something here worth staying for. The table groaned with food, and conversation flowed freely, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Evelyn caught Colt's eye across the room, and they shared a smile that held 5 decades of memory and love. This was what they'd built. Not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of choosing love over fear, of standing together against whatever tried to break them, of creating safety for others the way they'd created it for each other. That night, lying in bed with Colt's arms around her the way they'd been for 50 years, Evelyn thought about that terrified young woman who'd stepped off a stagecoach with a bruised face and a desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, life could be different. "We did good," she whispered into the darkness. "We did real good," Colt agreed, his breath warm against her hair. "I love you, Evelyn Maddox. I love you, Colton Maddox. Always have, always will." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the comfort of a life well lived, a love well chosen, a home well built. The cottonwood tree stood watch outside their window, its branches reaching toward the stars, its roots dug deep into Texas soil. It had been there before them and would be there after them, bearing witness to the truth that sometimes the most broken people find each other and build something unbreakable. Sometimes a woman running from everything finds a man who asks for nothing but gives her the world. Sometimes a desperate gamble pays off in ways that echo through generations. Sometimes love wins. And in this small corner of the Texas Panhandle, under a sky full of stars and a tree that had survived 100 years of storms, it won spectacularly. The mail-order bride who'd arrived with fear in her eyes had found not just safety, but joy. Not just survival, but a life overflowing with purpose and meaning and love. And the cowboy who'd said he didn't bite had kept that promise every day for 50 years, choosing gentleness over violence, respect over control, partnership over ownership. They'd built a home together. They'd built a family. They'd built a legacy. And it all started because one scared woman got on a train heading west, and one lonely man sent a letter looking for companionship, and somehow, impossibly, 2 broken people became whole together. That was the story Evelyn told her great-grandchildren when they asked how she and Grandpa Colt had met. She'd leave out the worst parts. Children didn't need to know about Marcus Thornwood's dead wives or her father's violence. But she'd tell them the important truth. Sometimes, she'd say, the scariest thing you can do is also the right thing. I was terrified that day, but I got on that stage anyway. And it brought me here, to this place, to this family, to your Grandpa Colt. So remember, being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it leads you home. The children would nod solemnly, storing away this wisdom, not quite understanding it yet, but knowing instinctively that it mattered. That this story of their great-grandparents mattered. That the love that had built this family, this home, this life, it was something rare and precious and worth protecting. And as the years continued to turn and the seasons cycled through their eternal dance, the cottonwood tree stood watch over the Maddox Ranch, over the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who played in its shade, over the love story that had started with fear and desperation and transformed into something beautiful and lasting and true. The mail-order bride and the cowboy who didn't bite. Their story became legend in Dust River, passed down through generations, proof that sometimes the best things in life start with the bravest leaps of faith. And every spring, when the cottonwood bloomed and the prairie turned green, when the wildflowers carpeted the grass in purple and gold, the Maddox family would gather under that tree and remember the day it all began. The day Evelyn Carter became Evelyn Maddox. The day two strangers chose each other and built forever. The day love won,